Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time when love letters were written on thin paper, ink smudged by damp hands, and the smell of coal smoke from a nearby barracks drifted through the cracks. You're here in the middle of a world at war, but instead of charging onto a battlefield, your battle is quieter, holding on to love when the distance between you is measured not just in miles, but in fear and uncertainty. And just to be clear, you probably won't survive this without a few deep sighs and a stubborn streak as wide as the English Channel. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, post your location and your local time in the comments. I'm always curious where and when you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The barracks smell faintly of oil and damp wool, the kind that clings to your sleeves no matter how much you air them out. You've found a quiet corner, though quiet here means you can just about hear yourself think over the scrape of boots and low mutters from the other soldiers. The paper you're writing on is thin, economy stationery, they call it, but you still try to fit as much as you can. Your pen scratches, catching now and then on the grain. You pause, thinking about what to write that will survive the censor's scissors and still let your spouse know you're alive. You're thinking of them, you're still you. The censors are a fact of life. Mainstream history tells us every letter was read and sometimes heavily edited before it ever made it to its destination. Soldiers were instructed to avoid details about their location, operations, or morale. But love still found its way into the margins. And here's the quirky part. Some couples developed elaborate codes to slip past the censors. Historians still argue whether those codes were genuinely effective or just a romantic gesture, but a dash here, a certain adjective there, might tell your spouse more than the censors realized. Your fingers are cold, but you keep writing. You talk about the weather, mud, mostly. You talk about how much you miss the smell of home, though you don't say home too many times. The censors might think you're trying to hint at a location. You slip in one of your private jokes, the one about the neighbor's chicken that always escaped. You hope it makes them smile. Across from you, another soldier folds his letter, tucks it into the communal mailbag, and exhales like he's just finished something monumental. And it is monumental. These scraps of paper are lifelines. The postal service in wartime is chaotic. Some letters take weeks, some arrive in bundles, others never show up at all. Still you write, because not writing feels worse. Later, when the lamps are dimmed, you lie in your bunk and imagine your spouse reading your words by candlelight or under the weak bulb of a rented room. You picture their fingers tracing the ink where you signed your name, maybe even the little heart you risked adding, though you know some censor in a drafty office might have rolled his eyes. You picture the moment they fold it back up, tuck it away, and maybe, just maybe, reread it before bed, the way you'll replay the memory of writing it. In the darkness, the war feels far away for a few breaths, replaced by the imagined sound of their laugh. You let yourself drift with that thought, even though tomorrow will bring another day of drills, mud, and waiting. But for tonight, you've sent a piece of yourself across the miles, and that feels like winning something small, stubborn, and important. The first telegram comes on a damp morning, the kind of day where the sky seems undecided between rain and fog. You're back in your tiny quarters, a kettle grumbling on the stove, when the knock comes. It's the telegraph boy, thin as a broom handle, cap slightly too big, holding a folded slip of yellow paper. His eyes don't linger. He's got a bag full of other people's news. Your hands shake as you open it. The words are abrupt, not because your partner isn't romantic, but because telegrams charge per word, and wartime rates aren't kind to poets. Still, somehow, in all those clipped phrases, stop after every few words, you can feel their heart. The engagement is official now. No flowers, no candlelit dinners, no strolling through a park debating ring designs. Just, love you always, stop, will you marry me, stop. It's bare bones, but the message punches through the distance like a beacon. Mainstream history tells us wartime engagements by telegram were far from rare. The urgency of the times made people want to lock in their futures. But here's the quirky thing, some couples didn't even meet in person before the proposal. Letters and photos were enough, especially for soldiers posted overseas who met pen pals through friends, churches, or charity drives. Historians still argue whether these long-distance beginnings had higher or lower success rates than peacetime romances, but they agree the war created a whole generation of marriages built on paper promises. You sit at your small table, reading the message over again. The brevity feels almost comical, like getting your life changed in a haiku. And yet your chest feels warmer. You imagine your partner pacing somewhere, maybe in uniform, maybe on a lunch break, rehearsing the exact words before handing them to the telegraph clerk. You wonder if they cringed at the cost of each extra word. You take out paper to reply, but telegrams are expensive both ways, so you choose carefully. Yes, stop, absolutely, yes, stop. You don't add more. You don't need to. The clerk at the post office gives you a look, half amusement, half sympathy, when you hand it over. He's seen dozens of these in the past month alone. Some come from men shipping out, some from women about to board transport ships as nurses or war workers. All of them hum with the same mix of panic and joy. That night, you picture your partner unfolding your reply, maybe with a grin that makes some comrade elbow them in jest. You picture their fingers lingering over the words, even if they're as brief as a grocery list. And you think, strange as it is, that you'll tell people one day you got engaged in the space of 12 words. The war roars on outside your window, distant gunfire, the drone of an aircraft heading somewhere you can't see. But inside you've staked a claim on something that feels untouched by all that. A promise, hammered into place with nothing more than ink, paper, and a few coins dropped on a telegraph clerk's counter. The dress is not yours, at least not originally. You're standing in front of a warped mirror in a borrowed gown that's been worn by 3 other brides this month alone. It smells faintly of mothballs and lavender, the kind of scent that clings to the fabric no matter how many times it's aired out. The hem has been hastily let down, then hemmed again, each stitch a tiny clue to the gown's revolving door life. Wartime shortages mean bridal shops aren't an option for most people. Mainstream history notes that wedding dresses during the war were often improvised, made from whatever was available, even parachute silk. But here's the quirky bit. In some towns, wedding dress pools were a thing. Local women organized communal wardrobes of gowns, veils, and shoes that rotated between brides like a traveling circus of lace. Historians still argue whether these arrangements brought communities closer together or just highlighted how scarce everything had become. You smooth the front of the dress, fingers finding a patch where the fabric's just a shade lighter, evidence of an old wine stain, carefully bleached but never fully gone. The veil is short, almost comically so, and pinned to your hair with a clip that wobbles if you move too quickly. Outside you can hear your cousin in the kitchen boiling water for tea. Rationing has made tea leaves precious, so she's using them twice, pretending the second steep is just as good. You've promised yourself not to think about the cake, which is mostly air and ingenuity, powdered egg, a smear of jam, and whatever sugar could be saved up from coupons. The officiant has been told to keep things short. There's a train to catch later, and the groom's leave is measured in hours, not days. When you see him, uniform still smelling faintly of the train station, you can tell he's been rushed too, hair still damp from the world's fastest wash. There's a flicker in your chest as you realize this is it. No grand rehearsal, no carefully choreographed walk down the aisle, just a gathering of whoever could make it, standing shoulder to shoulder in the borrowed parlor. The vows are spoken quickly, voices competing with the sound of rain starting up outside. You notice the officiant's hand trembling as he flips the page in his book. He's performed so many wartime ceremonies, he could probably do it from memory, but the paper is a comfort. And then it's done. You're married. The borrowed dress rustles as you turn, the veil slipping slightly. Someone presses a mug of hot tea into your hands and you take it gratefully, not minding that it's weak. A neighbour's child tugs at your sleeve to get a better look at your ring, which you slip off for a moment so they can admire it. Later, when you hand the gown back to its owner, you find yourself smoothing the fabric again, almost apologetically. You wonder who will wear it next week and whether she'll notice the tiny stitch you had to add when the seam under your arm started to give way. Maybe she will, and maybe she'll smile at the thought of one more invisible thread connecting strangers in the strangest of times. You don't so much walk down the aisle as clomp it. The church floor has seen better days, scuffed by boots and hurried mops, and your soles leave a little crescent of dried mud with each step, like you're planting tiny moons to mark your path. Your uniform doesn't drape, it declares. The fabric is stiff, pockets squared, buttons that catch the light like tiny medals for bravery in the field of showing up. Somewhere, faint and insistent, the air raid siren begins its mournful spiral, the world's least romantic organist, winding up just as the vicar clears his throat. Timing, impeccable. No one flinches. You all glance up once, briefly, as if the ceiling might answer for the sky, and then the vicar nods. Continue. This is what wartime ceremonies look like. Quick, practical, layered with a kind of stubborn tenderness. Mainstream history tells us that thousands of couples married in uniform during the Second World War, especially in cities that lived under blackout and bomber routes. Photographs show fresh-pressed tunics beside veils pinned hurriedly, bridesmaids in suits because fabric was rationed and good sense was not. You straighten your collar, you wonder if the starch can hold a vow. At the front, the altar is flanked by sandbags like sleepy bouncers. The windows are crisscrossed with tape to keep shards from flying, and blackout curtains hang like heavy eyelids, drooping at the corners. Someone has tucked a little jar of flowers beside the hymnals, ragged daisies and one stubborn rose, probably saved from a garden that's now half potatoes. The vicar, who has performed more of these compressed ceremonies than he can remember, keeps his voice low. You repeat him, low too, because loud voices feel like invitations for attention from above. Your partner's hand is warm, their sleeve smells faintly of soap and coal dust, and you think, wildly, that this is somehow the most ordinary and extraordinary thing you've ever done. The first joke of the day arrives on cue. The siren lifts into a wobble, and a baby in the third pew answers with an indignant squawk, as if critiquing the pitch. You can feel everyone's shoulders loosen by a fraction. Wedding bells, your mind quips, remixed by the Ministry of Unscheduled Drama. The vicar's mouth twitches like he's trying not to laugh. There's a beat of silence, and then the words keep flowing, the ones you practiced in your head between telegrams and borrowed dress fittings and cups of spectacularly weak tea. Your ring is a story. It looks like gold mostly, but the band is slightly duller, more honest. A friend scavenged scrap metal and a local jeweller coaxed it into a circle. Austerity chic, somebody muttered. Quirky tidbit, there are tales, half true, half hoped, of rings hammered from aluminum taken off downed aircraft, tiny emblems of turning destruction into promise. Historians still argue whether those stories were rare, one-offs, or popular folklore, but the idea is so tidy it's hard not to believe it when the metal catches the nave's thin light. You slide the band onto your partner's finger with steady hands, though your heart is performing its own drill routine, left, right, left, right. Your vows land softly against the wood and stone, the air raid siren now a distant ribbon of sound that you simply lay your words beside. Outside, the warden's bicycle ticks past. You can hear the chain in the pause between sentences. Somewhere in the back, the choir boy who's been drafted into bell duty fiddles with a length of rope, looking like he wants to be brave and ring it anyway. He doesn't. Today, your voices are the bell. A uniform is a peculiar wedding garment. It's all edges and insistence, hard-won authority, stitched into the seams. But when your partner looks at you, you see their face before the war. Laughter in a park, arguments about whether the neighbour's chicken was a genius escape artist or just supernaturally lucky. The uniform blurs for a moment. You remember the telegram? Yes, stop. Absolutely yes, stop. And how those clipped words carried this vast, messy feeling all the same. Now here you are, standing still, as if stillness itself is an act of resistance. The vicar pronounces you married, succinct, as though economy has reached even holy language, and the congregation exhales like a single creature. Someone coughs, someone else sneezes. A cousin applauds once, just once, then thinks better of it and converts the second clap into an energetic smoothing of their coat. You smile. There's a tiny pause while everyone recalibrates to joy. Then the organ wheezes to life, producing a hymn that sounds like it's being played by a polite badger. You love it. Confetti is technically frowned upon because it makes a mess, and mess is enemy territory when everyone is short of brooms and longer on dust. So what you get instead is a handful of torn paper scraps that look suspiciously like a retired ration book. They flutter around you in a papery snow, coupons and perforations drifting down like blessings from the Ministry of Make-Do. You're fairly certain you see sugar on one square and resist the urge to pocket it. Second joke, imagine explaining to future you that you tried to loot your own confetti for pastry. You step back down the aisle, clomp clomp tiny moons, and stop beside the sandbags for photographs. The camera is large and grumpy. The flash is a little explosion that makes everyone blink and turns the scene momentarily into a negative. You and your partner in stark white outlines, the uniforms a dark field, the bouquet a pale blur at your hip. Mainstream photographs from the period often show this same composition, a line of determined faces, uniforms like scaffolding holding the moment up. You think about the last photo you took before the war, someone's birthday, a cake that didn't need ration coupons, and you tuck that memory beside this one like two postcards in the same drawer. It's still raining when you reach the door. The warden lifts his hand in a salute that's half blessing, half warning to mind the blackout curtains when you come back later. The siren slows, winds down, and in the hush that follows, you can hear the city resume breathing. Your partner squeezes your hand twice, a code you invented back when letters arrived with missing lines, whole paragraphs swallowed by the censor's careful black bars. Squeeze, squeeze, I'm here. Your return signal, squeeze, squeeze back. Me too. No cars, of course. Fuel is reserved for things with official headlines. You have a bicycle with a wobbly seat and a tendency to announce potholes with a noise like a goat sneezing. You straddle it anyway, your partner steadying the handlebar, and then you coast down the slick lane, veil pinned tight, cap pulled low, past windows curtained dark, past the pub where someone has chalked "Drink Courage" on the door, past the bakery that sells loaves that taste slightly of hope and slightly of turnip. Third joke. The bicycle bell applauds you twice when you don't touch it, apparently as moved by the romance as anyone. At the hall next to the church, a table has been laid with everything the ration books can conjure, sandwiches that lean heavily on imagination, a cake with icing made from a mysterious white paste that might be condensed milk bravely trying to be buttercream, and tea steeped until the water admits defeat. A slice of the cake lists to one side like a ship taking on water. You love every crumb. Someone produces a bottle of something celebratory and unlabeled. The cork pops with a sound small enough not to attract attention and large enough to make your aunt say, "Oh!" in pleasure. The toasts are short. Everyone knows you have only a little time before the next drill, the next duty, the train that will return one of you to a map dotted with pins. Still, there's a moment when the room glows. The vicar tells a story about a couple who'd been married during a raid, the hymn swallowed by sirens, and how they kept singing anyway until the all clear joined the chorus. Historians still argue whether wartime weddings genuinely boosted morale in any measurable way, or whether they simply offered people a private shoreline to stand on while the tide did what it liked. You decide measurement is overrated. What matters is that your heart has a place to report to, daily, no matter the orders pinned to the notice board. Someone asks for a kiss, and you oblige, gentle, brief, a vow made visible. It's not a movie kiss, it's better, deliberate, balanced, quietly stubborn. You think of the borrowed gown from earlier, the borrowed everything, and how somehow it all adds up to something undeniably yours. The room claps, the baby in the third pew applauds with a spoon, and you bow, mock formal, as if you've just concluded a performance of two people who refuse to give up. When it's time to go, you collect your cap and your courage. Outside, the street lamps are hooded. The wet stones shine faintly like fishbacks. You tuck your partner's arm through yours and walk, counting steps not because you need to, but because it feels like a spell. At the corner, you both pause to read the bulletin board. Updates, names, locations that the sensors will allow. And then you do the bravest thing you do all day. You turn away and keep walking toward whatever comes next. At the door of your small room, you fumble with keys and then step into a quiet that's almost startling. The blackout curtains make the air feel thicker, like velvet. You hang your jackets beside each other, careful, reverent. You set the ring dish on the windowsill, unnecessary but hopeful. You exhale, the sound of completing a circuit. There will be a train soon. There is always a train soon. For now, you share a chair, a cup, a laugh at the bicycle bell's earlier applause. You lean your heads together, and for a handful of breaths, the world stops being about maps and becomes about this square of floor, this warm, ordinary miracle of two. The feast is a puzzle before it's a meal. Everyone's carrying something wrapped in paper, tin, or questionable optimism, and it all gets laid out on a table that's seen more sewing projects than banquets. Your guests arrive clutching ration books like secret weapons, flipping through the coupon pages to prove they've brought their share, as if you're about to run the world's least glamorous speakeasy. The rules of wartime rationing are strict. Mainstream history makes it clear that sugar, butter, and meat are guarded like gold bars. But here's the quirky part. Weddings sometimes triggered odd exceptions. A bride could apply for a special allocation of extra sugar to make a proper cake, though proper was relative. Some of those cakes were more architectural ambition than culinary triumph. Historians still argue whether these exceptions were a morale booster or just bureaucratic window dressing, but every bride who managed it will tell you it was worth the paperwork. Your cake, if you can call it that, has a respectable height but suspicious lightness. The inside is part flour, part potato, and part mystery. Your aunt swears it's a special blend, which is exactly the sort of thing people say when they know better than to tell you the full ingredient list. The frosting is whitish, made from reconstituted milk powder, and sweetened with the kind of sugar substitute that leaves a faint licorice aftertaste. You smile because it's cake-shaped, and in these times, that's enough. Around it, there are sandwiches with more spread than filling, tiny triangles of bread shielding slivers of pickled beetroot or the occasional lone cucumber slice. Someone's brought a tin of Spam, sliced thin and fanned out like it's an exotic delicacy. The tea is weak but bottomless, served in a mismatched army of cups, floral china, chipped enamel, a mug with a slogan about saving fuel. As you work your way around the table, you notice people swapping items like traders at a small, highly caffeinated marketplace. The neighbour from 3 streets over barters her scone for an extra slice of corned beef. A child tries to trade his sandwich for 2 lumps of sugar, only to be caught by his grandmother, who replaces it with a stern look and an extra spoon of jam. 3 jokes appear without warning. One from your uncle, this cake is so light it might float away before we eat it. One from the vicar, I'd bless the sandwiches, but I'm afraid they might multiply. And one from you, if anyone finds real butter in here, please turn it in to the authorities immediately. The laughter is genuine, the kind people let out when they're glad for an excuse to stop worrying. A gramophone wheezes into life in the corner, spinning something just upbeat enough to make the children dance in erratic circles. Your partner is pulled away by a great aunt who insists on teaching them a step or two before the war changes everything. You watch, smiling, and think how surreal it is to stand in a room that smells of tea and mothballs while the world outside smells of smoke and oil. Between bites, there's talk of who came from where, guests who crossed blackout dark streets, others who caught the last bus before the driver declared he was going home. You realize that in its own way, the journey here was as much an act of love as anything else today. Later, when the plates are mostly empty and the cake is a series of crumbs clinging to the lace tablecloth, someone wraps up a slice for you to keep. For later, they say, though you both know it won't last the train ride. You tuck it into your coat pocket like a talisman, a sweet reminder that even in lean years, people will find a way to celebrate. As the evening fades, the guests gather their coats, tucking ration books safely away, and leave with cheeks pink from the cold and the tea. You stand in the doorway with your partner, watching them disappear into the fog, one by one, until it's just the two of you left in the quiet. The table looks smaller now, the plates cleared, the air warm with the memory of voices. You take your partner's hand, and without saying it, you both know. This was a victory in its own small, stubborn way. The photographer has set up in the one corner of the hall that still catches decent daylight, right next to the blackout curtains, which are half-pinned back like shy stage drapes. You and your partner stand in position, shoulders almost touching but not quite, because you've been told, hold still. And in this era, stillness means stiff. The air smells faintly of wet wool from the coats piled nearby, and you can hear the gramophone in the distance, crackling its way through a tune that feels both jaunty and tired. Photography in wartime is deliberate. Mainstream history reminds us that film was rationed, and flashbulbs weren't exactly growing on trees. Every shot had to count. That's why you're holding your smile in place for what feels like an entire winter. But here's the quirky bit. Some couples tucked little personal rebellions into these portraits. A wink, a finger barely brushing a partner's sleeve, a hidden note folded in a pocket. Historians still argue whether these were intentional acts of coded romance or just the accidents of fidgety humans, but looking at certain old photos, it's hard not to believe the mischief was on purpose. The camera itself is a beast, boxy and solemn, with a lens that makes you feel like you're confessing something. The photographer ducks under his black cloth, emerges, squints, and says, "Again?" You shift your weight slightly, but not enough to make the hem of your partner's uniform brush yours. That little touch will have to wait until no one's watching. The flash is a small explosion, startling in the dimness. For a heartbeat afterward, you can't see, just the ghostly outline of your partner's face lingering in the glare. Then the world resolves again. The taped windows, the jar of daisies in the corner, your reflection faint in the dark glass. You blink hard and the photographer says, "One more for luck." This time you let yourself lean in just a hair. Your partner's hand is resting at their side, but the edge of their pinky grazes yours, and that's enough. The shutter clicks, the moment is caught, and you think, not for the first time, that the real story of this day will never be written in the official records, but in details like this. When the session's over, the photographer promises to send the prints as soon as possible, which could mean anything from a week to a month, depending on post delays. You nod, but you're already imagining sliding the photo into a letter, sending it across miles so your spouse or their family can see that for one brief afternoon you looked entirely unbothered by the state of the world. Later, as the light fades and the blackout curtains are drawn tight, you tuck yourself into the small room you've been given for the night. You think about how, someday, someone might find that photograph in a drawer. They'll see the uniforms, the ration book smiles, the taped windows. They'll think about the war, of course, but maybe, if they're paying attention, they'll notice your partner's pinky just barely touching yours. And maybe they'll understand that even in the middle of history's noise, you found a way to make a little quiet of your own. The platform is a theatre of interruptions, steam hissing from the engine, whistles shrilling, boots clanging against metal steps. You're there early, but the station already feels too full, the air thick with coal smoke and goodbyes. Couples huddle in pockets of space, hands linked, faces bent close, as if trying to memorize each other in a hurry. You and your partner stand near the far end, where the shadows from the platform roof stripe the ground like a zebra crossing that leads nowhere you want to go. The farewell scene is a staple in wartime memory. Mainstream history notes that photographs from the era often show lovers framed by clouds of steam, a kind of accidental, romantic cinematography. But here's the quirky detail. Some stations posted no loitering signs, specifically to discourage long, drawn-out partings that delayed departures. Historians still argue whether these rules were about efficiency or about keeping emotions from clogging up the timetable, but everyone seems to agree they were impossible to enforce. You clutch your partner's sleeve, not in desperation exactly, but in an act of claiming. Around you, voices rise and fall in fragments. Right soon, don't worry about me, I'll be back before you know it. There's the occasional forced joke, someone shouts to bring back souvenirs, and everyone laughs a little too loudly. The train idles like a restless animal, its pistons sighing. Your partner tries to say something about keeping warm, about eating enough, about not skipping meals. You answer with your own litany, letters, parcels, careful with yourself. These exchanges aren't about information, they're about filling the air so it doesn't collapse into silence. Then the guard calls all aboard, and the rhythm changes. Couples pull apart, some quickly, like ripping tape, others slowly, fingers dragging until they have no choice but to let go. You walk with your partner to the carriage door, your steps matching without trying. They turn, give you that half smile you'll see in your sleep later, and climb aboard. You stand back as the train jolts, then starts to move, the windows sliding past like a reel of silent film. Your partner leans out, one hand gripping the frame, the other raised in a wave that's part promise, part apology. You wave back, and the steam wraps around you both, making the world briefly vanish. When the train is only a shrinking shape, you stay there, because leaving feels like giving up too soon. The platform empties until it's just you and the echo of footsteps. The steam has settled into your hair, into your coat, into the place in your chest where breath comes harder. You reach into your pocket, find the folded telegram they sent you weeks ago. Yes, stop. Absolutely, yes, stop. And hold it for a moment before tucking it back. The war will keep moving, timetables will keep dictating your moments, but here, on this worn stretch of concrete, you've pressed pause. You turn toward the exit, slowly, the sound of the whistle still lingering in your ears like a note that refuses to fade. The envelope arrives with corners worn soft, the paper creased, like it's been folded and refolded too many times in too many pockets. You know immediately it's from your partner. The handwriting leans forward like it's in a hurry to reach you. But when you open it, your eyes trip over blacked-out bars. Whole sentences swallowed by thick ink, leaving gaps like teeth knocked from a smile. Censorship is the uninvited third party in every wartime correspondence. Mainstream history tells us that military mail was screened to keep sensitive details like troop movements, supply shortages, or bad morale from reaching the wrong eyes. But here's the quirky part. Sometimes the censors got overzealous, blotting out harmless phrases because they sounded suspicious. Historians still argue whether these mistakes were from genuine caution or a clerk's boredom on a long shift, but either way, the result was the same. Letters that read like strange poetry. You hold the page up to the light as if that will help. It doesn't. One sentence begins, "I wish I could tell you about the, and then nothing but a neat, black rectangle. You imagine what might fill the space, a battle, a beautiful sunset over some far-off ridge, the taste of something rare and sweet shared with comrades, or maybe just a joke that didn't pass inspection. Reading between the lines becomes an art form. A mention of the weather might mean rain has made the roads impassable. The food is better this week, could be code for supplies finally arriving. And then there are the emotional cues, an extra exclamation mark, a sentence cut short, the way they sign their name. You've learned to read those as carefully as any news bulletin. Sometimes you write back with your own coded language. You might say, "The garden is doing fine, even though you don't have a garden. What you mean is, I'm safe." Or you might casually mention visiting the river, which really means, I miss you more than I can say. It's a strange kind of intimacy, this shared game of hide-and-seek with words. You picture your partner sitting somewhere drafty, pen in hand, glancing up now and then to see if anyone is watching. You imagine them pausing mid-sentence when they remember the censors, then choosing a safer phrase, all the while hoping you'll still hear what they meant underneath it. When you fold the letter and slide it back into its envelope, you don't feel frustrated, not exactly. The gaps are a reminder of the distance, yes, but they're also proof that even with half the words missing, the feeling still reaches you. You smooth the paper once, tuck it away with the others, and think about the day you'll read their stories without any black bars in the way. For now, you sit at your table, pen ready, already planning which harmless sentences you can make dangerous enough to mean, I love you. You start with a shoebox, because shoeboxes are the Swiss Army knives of domestic logistics. It once held sensible lace-ups you bought with ration coupons and a sigh. Now it's a ship bound for the front. It's cargo listed on the back of an old envelope so you don't forget anything. Chocolate, if it survives the journey. Socks, if they survive the mud. A tiny tin of salve for cracked hands, and one contraband item that winks at the rules but doesn't entirely spit in their eye. You spread a newspaper on the table, the same paper that told you to save bacon fat and Victory Garden with zeal, and start assembling comfort like you're packing a spell. Mainstream history says care packages were lifelines. The Red Cross and similar groups moved mountains of parcels, and armies posted official lists. Send hard candies, send razor blades, send stationery. Please do not send perishables unless you're fond of disappointment. Standard size, standard weight, standard patience. And yet, within that grid, everyone coloured outside the lines. You tuck in a bar of chocolate that has been rationed into invisibility, then decide to wrap it twice because summers have a sense of humour and the mail sacks are ovens with stamps. Socks go in next, hand-knit, the heel reinforced, the yarn a stubborn slate grey that won't show stains, no matter how hard the stains try. The knit-your-bit patterns printed in the paper are all the rage. Church halls hum with needles like a nest of benevolent crickets. Quirky tidbit, some knitters slip a note into the toe. From Ida, who hopes your feet forgive the weather. As if the sock might carry a tiny introduction from one world to the other, historians still argue whether those homemade socks actually outperformed the standard issue ones, or whether the real value was in the quiet human handwriting tucked into a seam, but no one disputes the morale they delivered, toe by toe. You add a small tin of foot powder, then hesitate. There are rumours about banned items, contradictory as weather forecasts. No glass, someone says. No liquids, says another. Absolutely no spirits, says everyone with an official hat. You look at the miniature flask on your counter, the one you joked about earlier, and imagine the censor opening the box, arching an eyebrow, and either confiscating it or quietly nodding in solidarity, depending on the kind of day they're having. You settle for a compromise, a cube of sugar infused with a miraculous memory of rum, joke one, wrapped like a jewel. It smells faintly of celebration. Your partner's favourite brand of razor blades? Impossible. Your second favourite? Also impossible. You tuck in a packet of serviceable and absolutely fine blades from a brand that sounds like a hardware store's cousin. A tiny sewing kit joins them, needles taped to cardboard, thread wound on a sliver of envelope, 2 buttons saved from a departing coat, and you add a note for emergency button diplomacy. You consider soap. The nice stuff is gone, stolen by the war and your own hands. On the shelf sits a block that smells like lemons and ambition. You shave off a small piece and wrap it in wax paper. Next to it you set a pencil stub and a sharpener the size of a ladybug. The pencil seems ridiculous until you imagine it being the only thing between your partner and a letter you can hold in your hands. Letters. You slide one on top, no perfume, because censors have a sense of humour that stops just short of rosewater, but you do press your lips to the paper once because you are sentimental, and because the rules say nothing about invisible ink made of hope. You write around the edges just in case the censors get enthusiastic again, and you tuck in a joke about the neighbour's chicken who has now figured out how to open gates, genius confirmed, and currently acts like she pays the mortgage. When your partner laughs at the memory, you want them to feel the room tilt toward home for a second. Now the contraband question returns, tapping its foot. The first time you heard the word, you pictured swashbucklers and smuggled sapphires. In practice, contraband is smaller. A silk handkerchief, a dab of hair pomade smuggled into a tiny tin labelled tooth powder, or a sprig of lavender tucked so deep the inspectors won't bother fishing for it. Today you compromise again. One pair of lucky laces, dyed with the barest suggestion of colour you swear occurred naturally in the wild, joke 2. If anyone asks, they are simply string that grew optimistic. You cushion everything in newspaper, the headlines crunch. You add biscuits that could survive a siege without flinching. Experience has taught you that by the time the biscuits arrive, they will be granular memories, which your partner will stir into tea to make war pudding. You pretend this is an innovation and not a cry for mercy. There's a debate every time you seal one of these boxes. Are you sending enough? Are you sending the right kind of enough? Your aunt says cigarettes would be more appreciated than chocolate. Your cousin says books. The vicar says prayer cards. The neighbour says socks. Always socks. Forever socks. Historians still argue whether cigarettes in rations were a calculated morale tool or an accidental public health time bomb that ticked for decades. You decide on a slim packet your partner smoked before any ration ever existed and tuck it in with a note that says, "Light only when you're smiling." At the post office, the clerk recognizes your careful corners. Everyone learns to package like a pro, string tied in uncompromising knots, labels written in capital letters that behave. You hand your parcel over the counter with that odd mixture of pride and helplessness, like sending a child on a long errand you cannot supervise. The clerk weighs it with a scale that looks older than every conflict currently in the newspaper, stamps it and says, "Next." The quiet violence of bureaucracy, your love turned into a receipt. On the way home, you imagine the journey. The shoebox rides in a sack with 100 other small worlds, lurching from train to truck to tired hands. Somewhere a censor flips the lid and peers in. You hope they're the sort of person who understands that a sugar cube's scent can be a truce, that a sock with a note can argue someone out of despair for one night. Maybe they even chuckle at your label, biscuits, best eaten courageously. Weeks later, always weeks, you receive a reply. Your partner thanks you for the chocolate, which arrived as a single, cohesive, geological layer stuck lovingly to the wrapper. "We chiseled it," they write, "and pretended we were archaeologists on a cocoa dig." Joke 3. The socks made a sergeant declare you a national treasure. The foot powder started an argument among 3 people over who had the most noble feet, and the sewing kit elevated your partner to minister of buttons for their unit. The sugar cube? A miracle, your partner says, the kind of alchemy that turns tea into a future. They also confess they've shared some of the contents. That's part of the magic you can't pack, but always hope for. A parcel becomes a commons. A square of chocolate divided along lines that have nothing to do with rank. A biscuit crumbled into a tin mug for 3. A pencil passed around to write 3 sentences apiece to 3 different kitchens. 3 different radios humming softly in the night. If love has a supply chain, this is it. Parcel to hand, hand to circle, circle back to you in words. Now you consider what you'll send next time. Maybe a tiny book of jokes, copied out in your hand. Because print is scarce and your handwriting is the one luxury item no ration can touch. Maybe a postcard of your town, not the scenic side but the row of shops where Mrs. Quinn sells apples and rumours in equal measure. Maybe a handful of dried rosemary tucked so it won't tear anything, for a moment of green when everything is khaki and grey. You wash the table, fold the newspaper, and sit for a minute with your elbows propped, looking at the quiet surface where the shoebox sat. It's absurd that cardboard and string can travel farther than you can, but that's the era talking, not your heart. You imagine your partner slipping the sock note into a pocket, rubbing a thumb over the pencil stub like a worry stone, rationing chocolate chips of geology until the letter carrier appears again. Before bed, you scribble a line you'll add to the next parcel. If you find a feather tucked somewhere, it's from the neighbour's chicken who insisted on contributing to the war effort. You laugh into your sleeve and picture your partner holding up a small, ridiculous feather like evidence in a courtroom where levity is finally legal. Contraband and care, it turns out, are siblings. Both are small acts of disobedience against the idea that distance gets the last word. You can't ship safety, you can't box up peace, but you can send warmth disguised as wool, courage that tastes faintly of cocoa, and a rumour of lavender smuggled past the sensible rules. The parcel goes, and with it, a little permission for your partner to be human for an evening. Feet dry, hands clean, a cigarette lit only when the stars are being kind. And when they write back, when the letter arrives soft at the corners and bright at the heart, the black bars can take all the nouns they like. The verbs still arrive intact: miss, laugh, manage, wait, love. At first, you try to tell yourself it's just the post being slow. The war has a way of bending time. Letters bunch up and arrive in cheerful floods, or they vanish for weeks like shy house cats. But after the 14th day without a word, your hand starts hovering over the mail slot each morning a little longer. The absence has its own texture. The mornings are quieter, the kettle's whistle feels sharper, and you find yourself rereading old letters until you can recite them. Mainstream history says delays were common. Storms could ground planes, trains were diverted for military use, and sometimes whole postal sacks went missing. But here's the quirky thing. Some people swore they could feel a letter coming, a sort of phantom tug before the postman even turned the corner. Historians still argue whether that's a romantic delusion or just the human brain looking for patterns in a mess it can't control. You busy yourself with small tasks, darning socks, reorganizing the cupboard for the 3rd time this month, pretending the blackout curtains don't need mending just so you have something to stitch. The radio crackles through its usual ration of headlines, none of which tell you where your partner is or why they've gone silent. Some nights you dream you've received a letter and wake up with the taste of ink in your mouth, the words already fading before you can catch them. You get up, boil water, and sit at the table with your pen in hand. You write anyway because the act feels like a thread that might keep the distance from fraying entirely. The neighbours notice. Mrs. Quinn from next door taps her nose and says, "No news is good news," which sounds wise until you're the one sitting with the empty letterbox. A friend suggests you write to your partner's commanding officer, a formal request, polite and vague, but you hesitate, worried it will make you sound like you don't trust the silence. On the 18th day, a storm rolls in, and you stand at the window watching the rain smear the street lamps into puddled halos. You think about how somewhere out there your partner might be looking at the same kind of rain, hands tucked into coat pockets, head bent against the wind. It's a thin connection, but it's something. When the letter finally arrives, it's bundled with 3 others, all stamped and dated weeks apart. The paper smells faintly of damp, the ink has bled in places, and a corner of one page is torn as if it caught on something sharp. You read them in order, even though you want to skip ahead, and by the time you finish, the silence feels less like an abyss and more like a long, crooked hallway you've finally walked through. You place the letters on the table, smooth them flat, and run your fingers over each crease. Tomorrow, you'll write back. Tonight, you just sit with them, letting the ink remind you that even when the world goes quiet, sometimes it's only pausing for breath. The market smells of wet cabbage and coal smoke, and the air is thick with half-truths. You're there to trade coupons for a few extra potatoes, but you end up with something less tangible, a rumour. It comes from 2 women by the bread stall, their heads bent so close their hats nearly touch. You only catch fragments, place names you don't recognise, whispers about a unit caught in a bad one, someone's nephew who hasn't written since. Mainstream history reminds us that wartime information travelled in odd ways. Official bulletins were clipped and cautious, but gossip could sprint across entire towns in an afternoon. The quirky part? Some of it turned out to be surprisingly accurate, as if the grapevine had tapped into the telegraph lines. Historians still argue whether this was luck, a network of alert civilians, or just the human talent for piecing scraps into something that feels like truth. You pretend to focus on the potatoes while your ears stay tuned to the women's murmurs. One says something about that sector and awful losses, and your chest tightens before you even realize you're holding your breath. It could be anywhere. It could be no place near your partner, but the mind is an impatient cartographer. It draws the map before the evidence is in. By the time you get home, the rumor has taken root, sprouting ugly possibilities. You boil the potatoes, slice one open, and stare at the steam curling upward like it might carry an answer. You consider writing, but the letter would have to pretend you haven't heard anything. The censor would cut anything else out anyway. That night, the radio plays dance music between news updates, and you try to let it drown the whisper that's been following you all day. But when you lie down, you hear the women's voices again, only now they sound like they're standing just outside your door. You tell yourself you'll wait for proof, that rumors are like smoke. They look solid until you reach out and your hand closes on nothing. Still, when the post arrives 3 days later, you can't open it fast enough. The letter is short but steady. Your partner is well, the food is tolerable, the weather is not, no mention of anything dangerous. You exhale, slow and deliberate, as if you're trying not to wake the rumor curled up in the corner of your mind. For now, it stays quiet, but you know it will be back, wearing a new hat, carrying a fresh market bag of worry. You're not looking for trouble. Trouble is a creature that finds you at the grocer's. It arrives folded into the corners of conversations, tucked between the jam rations and the flour that isn't flour so much as powdered optimism. This time, trouble has red lipstick and a nervous laugh. "Did you hear," someone whispers, "about so-and-so keeping company with a corporal on leave?" "You didn't hear. Now you have." The words land like a coin dropped into a quiet room, small but loud. Infidelity whispers travel faster than telegrams and require no stamps. They cling to bus rails, drift through factory canteens, hitch rides at church doors. Mainstream history says wartime separations did produce more Dear John letters, breakups delivered by post, blunt as a boot heel. Some were written after months of distance wore grooves in people neither could fill with paper. Some after hearts simply turned toward the nearest warm light. And then there were the rumors, endless, echoing, about dances where hands drifted a little too slow, about blackout walks that stretched longer than curfew, about a friend of a cousin seen with someone who wasn't their someone. Here's the quirky bit. Some towns posted khaki warnings during World War I, lectures and leaflets trying to discourage young women from catching khaki fever, the supposed epidemic of falling for men in uniform on sight. The leaflets read like a cross between etiquette manual and stand-up routine, heavy on caution and light on fun. Meanwhile, factory canteens held socials with blue-shaded bulbs to comply with blackout rules, so everyone danced in a kind of moonlit aquarium, faces turning to shadows at the edges. If a stranger's laugh sounded like safety, well, the lighting was forgiving. Historians still argue whether wartime infidelity truly surged or whether the same human messiness simply enjoyed brighter publicity, amplified by shortage, stress, and the microphone of gossip. The first joke today slips in sideways. You tell yourself you're immune to gossip the way you tell yourself you're immune to sugar, then promptly eat 2 biscuits and listen anyway. The second arrives when your neighbor's chicken, escape artist, unpaid comedian, chooses this moment to trot down the lane and stare pointedly at you as if to say, "Don't look at me, I only fraternize with seed." The third is the nervous one you make in your head. If you ever do dance in that blue-lit canteen, you'll step so carefully the parquet will file a complaint for lack of enthusiasm. You keep walking, but the rumor tails you like a stray cat. At home, you boil water and lay out your comfort arsenal, the last square of cocoa geology your partner hasn't yet archaeologized in their letters, a heel of bread, a smear of jam that pretends it's generous. You tell yourself rumors are background noise, the station hiss between songs. Still, you catch yourself scanning the day's mail with a new kind of hunger. Assurance, quickly please, served hot. One letter arrives, a short one, V-mail, the microfilmed kind, reduced to the size of a postage stamp and then enlarged again, making your partner's handwriting look like it survived a shrinking spell. They write about the weather, mud, always mud, about the socks ministry you created with your parcels, about a sergeant who can darn like a Renaissance artist. No mention of dances, No mention of anyone's laugh. Your shoulders loosen, you rest your cheek on the cool table, and breathe. And yet you remember the dance you skipped last Friday, the way your friend begged, "Just come to listen." You said no because you were tired, because the blackout turned streets into velvet puzzles, because you imagined some future version of yourself explaining the image of your silhouette against a stranger's jacket. The calculus of appearances is exhausting. Still, the gramophone is not a sin, and your loneliness is not a crime. You know this. You do. The factory whistle blows the next afternoon, and the canteen fills like a lung. You go this time, armed with two strategies. Dance only with the girls from your shift. You make a circle, your laughter a rope you can't step over. And when the handsome corporal with the dimple asks, say, "My feet are on strike until payday," he laughs, salutes your feet. The tea is heroic in its weakness. Someone's brought a harmonica. For a moment, the music floats, and you're not a spouse waiting, not a rumour collector. You're just a body remembering how to move in a room that isn't afraid. A poster on the wall has opinions, bold letters about morals and decorum, and keeping temptation at a respectable distance. You make a face at it when no one's looking. If posters could blush, this one would. You dance with your friends. You pass the plate of biscuits around. One biscuit snaps like a chalkboard, and someone declares it an omen. You declare it progress. At least something is breaking that isn't a promise. Back on your street, the blackout warden doffs his cap. You think about the women who do keep company, the men who keep company, the couples who negotiate pauses and temporary treaties, the ones who don't. War levels some things and war elevates others. Fidelity is asked to do acrobatics across distances the human heart never auditioned for. You imagine all the quiet, complicated agreements people never put in letters. I will wait unless waiting rips me up in a way I can't return from. I will not judge unless judging is the only anchor I find. I will survive this, even if survival makes me different. You sit at your table, same table where you pack shoebox ships, same table where you read letters with blacked-out teeth, and you write. Not the question, you don't want to write that question, but the truth that is generous enough to be brave. I'm here, I'm tired, I'm trying. Some days I feel like a photo pinned under glass, and I don't want to live like a pinned thing. Tell me something small about your day that isn't the weather. Your partner answers a week later with the smallest thing that feels huge, a joke traded across bunks, a paper star cut from a ration label and stuck to the mess tent's pole for luck, a note from a chaplain who's figured out that socks plus a story equals a service. They do not mention dances. You do not mention dancing. Instead, you both write around the subject like cats walking around a puddle, never stepping in but acknowledging it's there, reflecting moonlight. There's a photograph in your partner's wallet. You know because you sent it and asked them to promise, and because the last time you were on leave together, you saw the wallet open. And there you were, in your borrowed gown, looking braver than you felt. You wonder sometimes whether your face keeps them from straying, and then you scold yourself because fidelity that depends on paper isn't what you're aiming for. You're aiming for the daily choice, the one that makes itself at canteens and checkpoint booths and all the blue-lit rooms of the world. I remember you. I choose you again. Some evenings, the whispers thin out. People are too tired to embroider anyone's life but their own. Other nights a story arrives with a scolding finger. Did you hear? And you lower your eyes to your knitting, counting stitches until the urge to answer fades. You are not naive, you're also not a judge. The war has everyone doing math with their loneliness, and the sums don't always balance neatly. Historians still argue whether communities were kinder than the rumours suggest, whether neighbours quietly understood more than they let on. choosing to hold families together with silence rather than shatter them with facts. You decide your contribution will be the quiet kind, less adding, less subtracting, more folding. Fold your opinions into your pocket. Fold your letters into envelopes. Fold your heart's flapping edges until they lie flat enough to rest. On a Friday, you pass the canteen and hear the harmonica again. Your feet hesitate, then carry you home. You make tea, you take out your partner's last letter and read the line that made you laugh out loud. The one about the cigarette that only lights when the stars are being kind. You light nothing. You sit in the dark and count breaths until the room fills back up with something that feels like patience. Before bed, you tuck a small sprig of rosemary into your next parcel, green, upright, stubborn. The label says, "For remembrance," because you're dramatic like that and because Shakespeare is free when sugar isn't. You add a feather, courtesy of your notorious neighbour, the chicken evidently still determined to contribute to the war effort. You write a note. Our local celebrity insists you keep this in your hat as a reminder that escape is always possible, though not always advisable. You laugh to yourself in the kitchen, alone and not alone. If someone asks you later whether the whispers were true about your street, your friends, your own heart, you'll think about blue light and harmonicas, about posters with opinions and posters that learned to mind their business, about letters that skipped the question and answered anyway. You'll say the war taught everyone to hold two truths at once. We were faithful to each other, and we were faithful to surviving. On your better days, you'll decide those aren't enemies. They are neighbours, borrowing sugar across a shared fence, nobody built on purpose. You switch off the lamp. The blackout turns the window into a mirror. You meet your own eyes and nod like you're agreeing to something you can't phrase yet. Somewhere far from your street, your partner folds their blanket and tells a joke about biscuits that shatter, and someone laughs, and the laugh carries a small piece of you with it. You lie down, cover up, and let sleep arrive like a train that for once is not leaving but pulling in. Steam soft as breath, platform empty of goodbyes. Leave is a strange kind of time, too short to settle into, too long to pretend it isn't happening. The train brings your partner back smelling of smoke, oil, and something faintly metallic, the scent of travel and uniforms that never quite shed the field. You spot them before they see you, and for a moment you just watch, the way their shoulders straighten when they scan the crowd, the faint hesitation in their step before they commit to a smile. Reunions on furlough were headline moments for wartime couples. Mainstream history tells us whole towns would turn out to greet returning units, streets lined with neighbours waving flags or dishcloths, whichever was handy. But here's the quirky bit. Many couples found those public welcomes overwhelming, even alienating. Historians still argue whether such displays brought comfort or just made the return feel like a parade for strangers. You've decided you prefer something quieter. That's why you're waiting at the far end of the platform, away from the knot of waving hands. When they reach you, you both hesitate, not because you don't know what to do, but because you don't know how much to do in public. Then the decision makes itself. You step forward, they step forward, and the hug lands somewhere between relief and exhaustion. Your cheek brushes their collar, the fabric stiff against your skin. They smell like the war and like home all at once. You have 48 hours together, which means every hour will be spoken for before it even begins. Meals are an event. A pot of stew, bulked out with lentils, bread that's more crumb than loaf, tea brewed so strong it could march on its own, conversation loops, updates, small jokes, assurances that everything is fine when it obviously isn't. The first joke comes when you offer them the fancy soap, which is just regular soap cut into a neat rectangle and wrapped in last year's Christmas paper. The second is when they try to repair the squeaky cupboard door and end up making it sound like an accordion. The third is quieter. They slide their socks across the polished kitchen floor just to see if you'll notice. You do. You tell them you're saving the applause for the encore. But furlough is full of pauses too, moments when the silence stretches. You catch them looking out the window like they're still watching for something in the distance. You wonder if they catch you watching them back, memorizing the shape of them in your kitchen, the exact way they bend over to stoke the fire. At night, you both lie awake longer than usual, each listening to the other's breathing as if it might be different now. They tell you a story they shouldn't, half in whispers. The rain that wouldn't stop, the boots that never dried, the time someone smuggled in a tin of peaches and everyone ate them with their fingers, laughing like children. Historians still argue whether these furlough confessions helped soldiers heal or just transferred some of the weight to the people waiting at home. The last morning comes too quickly. The train is scheduled for mid-afternoon, so you pretend the clock is just decorative, not a countdown. You make tea, pour it into the chipped mug they always claim, and talk about what you'll do next time. You both know better than to define that too closely. At the station, the goodbye is shorter than the hello. You've learned that dragging it out doesn't slow the train. They step aboard, turn to wave, and the steam swallows them before you can decide whether to wave back. The platform empties. You go home to the stew pot, the squeaky cupboard, and the socks they left draped over the chair. Small, stubborn proof they were here. You'll wash the socks tomorrow, not today. Today, you keep the room exactly as it is, so it still feels like they might walk back in before the kettle boils. It starts quietly, 2 neighbours with matching bumps under their sweaters, then 3 more women at the grocer's comparing notes on morning sickness instead of ration prices. The baby boom on leave is less of a boom and more of a slow, steady drumbeat at first, but you can hear it everywhere. In the factory, in the market, even whispered at the back of the church. Babies conceived in the margins of the war, during those precious furlough days when couples squeezed lifetimes into 48 hours. Mainstream history points out that wartime birth rates often spiked, despite rationing and housing shortages. The logic wasn't always romantic. Sometimes it was a defiant, life goes on statement. Other times, the simple arithmetic of proximity and urgency. The quirky bit, some small towns kept unofficial leave calendars, jokingly predicting when the next wave of prams would appear, based on who'd been spotted at the station 2 months prior. Historians still argue whether this was affectionate teasing or just another form of nosy bookkeeping, but the predictions were often eerily accurate. You notice it first in your own street. Mrs. Larkin's washing line sprouts tiny garments, your friend May knits booties, just in case, and the chemist quietly starts stocking more talcum powder. Someone jokes that the blackout isn't just saving electricity, it's saving the population charts from falling. You laugh, but you also notice how many of these pregnancies come with unspoken stories. Fathers who won't be back for the birth, couples who barely had time to agree on a name, mothers who keep one eye on the post for news that might never come. The first joke in your own kitchen comes when your partner, home on leave, watches you make tea and says, "I think we could handle a little more chaos." You nearly drop the kettle. The second is when you see a ration queue and realise half the women are comparing knitting patterns for baby hats. The third is when the vicar, trying to be discreet, prays for all the new arrivals and then trips over the phrase of all sizes. Some neighbours see the pregnancies as a badge of hope, proof that the war can't halt ordinary life. Others whisper about bad timing and poor planning, as though life's biggest events can be scheduled around air raid sirens. You decide that judgment is an easy pastime for people whose windows face the street but whose hearts don't. You write to your partner about the boom without naming names, describing the prams that will soon clog the narrow pavements, the knitting needles clacking like applause at a play no one bought tickets for. You don't mention that you've caught yourself daydreaming about such things, not because you're sure you want them now, but because the idea of something small and loud, and undeniably alive feels like an antidote to all this grey. The reply comes weeks later, folded and creased, with a single line that makes your throat tighten. If we're lucky, we'll have time to decide together. You tuck that letter into the same drawer as the socks from their last leave, and you don't need anyone's calendar to tell you what matters most is having the chance to make the choice at all. The wedding happens without you in the room. You're there on paper, your name inked in neat loops beside your partner's, witnessed by two strangers who will probably never see either of you again. Marriage by proxy feels oddly like mailing yourself in the most important yes of your life, signed and posted without the faintest sound of vows in your ears. Mainstream history records these ceremonies as entirely legal and surprisingly common in wartime, especially when military postings made leave impossible. Some countries even had standardized proxy forms complete with boxes to tick for whether the absent spouse was represented by a friend, a relative, or, quirky detail, a complete stranger assigned for the day. Historians still argue whether such arrangements strengthened bonds by bypassing long separations or weakened them by stripping away the ceremony's shared memory. For you, it's both simpler and stranger than you expected. You sit at the kitchen table in your best dress, not a gown, just your nicest wool, and sign the document under the watchful gaze of a clerk. The pen is blunt, the ink slightly watery. There's no bouquet, no music, just the sound of the clock marking each second between the start and finish. Afterward, your friend presses a small tin of tea into your hands as a wedding gift, even though rationing makes it a borderline scandal. You laugh, first joke, that it's probably worth more than a ring these days. At home, you make yourself a cup and sit with the steam curling against your face, trying to imagine what your partner is doing at this same moment. The second joke is quieter. You tell yourself the distance means you can skip the awkward first dance mishaps. The third arrives in your imagination, your partner telling someone about the wedding and having to explain that the bride wasn't actually there. You send a letter that night, tucking in a pressed flower from the windowsill box, brittle but still holding a faint trace of colour. You write about the ceremony as if you were both there, describing the room, the way the pen scratched, the fact that the clerk kept clearing his throat like he wanted to add a blessing, but didn't know how. Weeks later, a letter arrives from your partner, describing their end of it. The representative standing in their place, the odd formality of shaking hands with someone they'd met only minutes earlier, the clerk's stamp thudding down like a gavel.
Married, the paper declared, as if the act itself could leap continents. The paper is official, but what makes it real is smaller, the knowledge that somewhere far away on the same date, you both sat at different tables, signed your names, and silently promised to close the distance as soon as the world allowed it. Until then, the marriage lives in ink, in envelopes, and in the patient space between your hands when you imagine holding theirs. Living with your in-laws is an arrangement no one planned for, least of all you. Their house smells of furniture polish, coal dust, and a faint undercurrent of boiled cabbage that seems permanent like wallpaper. The guest room, now your room, is a narrow strip of space with a bed that dips in the middle, a wardrobe that sighs when you open it, and a single window half blocked by a water tank on the roof next door. Mainstream history reminds us that wartime housing shortages pushed families into configurations that would have been considered awkward at best in peacetime. Couples separated by deployments often meant one half moved back in with parents or in-laws, both for company and for pooling ration coupons. The quirky detail? Some households ran on silent agreements, where certain topics, politics, religion, or whether the gravy was too thin, were simply never mentioned for the sake of domestic peace. Historians still argue whether this polite avoidance preserved harmony or just stored up explosions for later. Your new home runs on a schedule you didn't design. Breakfast is served at exactly 7, whether you've been up since dawn or just stumbled out of bed. The wireless belongs to your father-in-law, and he controls the dial like a general commanding troops. Your mother-in-law has opinions on laundry,
which he shares in paragraphs while you fold. And yet they are kind, always making sure you have the first slice of bread from the loaf, saving you the biggest ladle of stew. The first joke comes on your second week when your mother-in-law warns you not to hang laundry too close to the chimney unless you like the smell of roast socks. The second is when your father-in-law calls the blackout curtains romantic and then winks, so obviously you almost spill your tea. The third is your own, whispered to yourself when you realize you've started referring to the creaky wardrobe as the lodger. There are challenges. Privacy is a rumor, not a reality. Letters from your partner arrive in the shared kitchen, and you learn to read them slowly, letting your in-laws pretend they aren't watching for your reaction. You write back in the bedroom with the door closed, your handwriting small and steady. Some evenings you help your mother-in-law with mending. She tells stories about your partner as a child, how they used to get caught climbing onto the roof to watch trains, how they once hid a baby rabbit in their coat for a week. You store these away, feeling like you've been given extra pieces to a puzzle you thought you already knew. Living here teaches you a different kind of patience. It's the patience of sharing a home with people who love the same person you do, but in a different way, from a different era. You are all waiting for the same return, though you picture it differently. One night, after the dishes are washed and the fire banked, your father-in-law says, without looking up from his newspaper, "You're doing all right." It's not a question, and it's not a compliment exactly. But it feels like permission to keep waiting, to keep belonging, even in a house that still smells faintly of boiled cabbage. The blackout makes the city feel like it's been hollowed out and filled with secrets. By day, the streets are as ordinary as they can be in wartime. Buses wheezing past, shop windows displaying their meagre wares. But by night, everything is swallowed by a velvet darkness so complete you can almost believe the world has been put away in a drawer. You and your partner learn to move through it together during leave, becoming connoisseurs of the blind man's waltz. Step slow, hand to elbow, mind the curb you can't see. Romance under blackout is part necessity, part invention. Mainstream history tells us blackout regulations were enforced with fines, lectures, and the occasional knock from a warden's torch if you let a sliver of light escape your curtains. The quirky part? Couples sometimes treated blackout walks as a kind of game, testing how well they knew the streets, using touch and memory instead of sight. Historians still argue whether these nighttime rambles were truly romantic or simply the only available privacy when houses overflowed with relatives. The air is heavy with scents you notice more in the dark: damp brick, horse manure, the faint sweetness of coal smoke. Your partner's sleeve brushes yours and you can hear them breathe, slow and deliberate, as though measuring each step. The first joke comes when they suggest you're walking in circles and you retort that you're just testing their navigation skills. The second is when you both misjudge a turn and end up in an alley behind the bakery, where the smell of bread is so strong you nearly propose breaking in. The third arrives when you pass the warden, who mutters, "Mind the curb," just as your partner trips over it. At home, the blackout transforms the small parlour into a cave. Curtains double-layered, lamps hooded. You sit side by side with only the fire to illuminate the edges of your faces. Voices are softer in the dark, as if the absence of light has made you reluctant to disturb it with too much sound. You talk about things you don't say in daylight. Half-finished dreams, what you'll do when the war ends, the fact that you miss silly things like the flicker of shop signs. The absence of light makes each touch louder. A hand over yours on the sofa, shoulders leaning together when you laugh. The occasional brush of knees, a reminder that even in a world that insists on dimming itself, some things still shine. Later, when your partner is gone again, you'll walk home under blackout alone, hearing the echo of their steps beside yours. You'll find yourself turning toward the bakery, even without meaning to, inhaling the ghost of warm bread and smiling in the dark. The parcel arrives in the post with an address that's been crossed out twice and rewritten in two different hands. You know before you even open it that it's from your partner. Nobody else would send something this oddly shaped or this suspiciously heavy. Inside the brown paper, carefully cushioned with crumpled newsprint, is the first souvenir of the war they've been able to send home. A shell casing polished until it gleams like brass honey, with your initials etched into one side. Gifts from the battlefield are an old tradition, though mainstream history notes they ranged from the practical, a folding knife, to the perplexing, a helmet turned into a flower pot. The quirky bit? Soldiers often bartered for such keepsakes with each other rather than finding them themselves, meaning your authentic memento might have already passed through 3 owners and 2 continents before reaching you. Historians still argue whether these tokens were meant more for the recipient's morale or the sender's sense of usefulness. You run your fingers over the etched letters, feeling the faint scratches where the metal fought the engraving tool. There's a letter tucked in with it, explaining that the casing came from a day that was too loud to forget, and that polishing it was oddly calming. The first joke comes when they write that they had to liberate the casing from a comrade who was planning to turn it into a lamp. The second is when they admit they spent 3 days trying to make the letters even, only to realize you'd probably find the wobble charming. The third is a quick sketch at the bottom of the page, the shell casing wearing a top hat. Alongside it is something softer, a silk scarf in a faded floral print. The note says it came from a shop whose roof had been blown open, letting in more sky than a shop usually wants. You can smell a faint hint of dust and something sweet, maybe perfume, maybe just your imagination. You drape it over your shoulders, feeling the strange weight of a gift that's both beautiful and pulled from a place of ruin. Later, when friends come to visit, you show them the shell casing and the scarf. They handle them carefully, as if the objects might still hold echoes of whatever they've seen. You don't tell everyone the whole story. Some things are just for you and the person who sent them. When you write back, you thank them for sending bits of the world you see, and joke that one day your mantle will look like a curio shop for history buffs. You mean it in the warmest way. Because these gifts, however strange, are proof they're still out there, thinking of you, sending what they can from a place that doesn't have much to give. You board with your papers in a neat stack, and your courage in a slightly messier one. The dock is a hive, porters shouting, gulls bickering like old aunties, lines of women clutching suitcases that look like they've already heard too many goodbyes. You're officially a war bride now, which sounds glamorous until you see the staircase going down to the berths and realize you'll be sleeping in a bunk so close to the next one that you could trade secrets without lifting your head. The ship was once a floating palace, or so the postcards say. Wartime turned it practical. Carpets replaced by scuff marks, chandeliers by bare bulbs with blackout shades, ballrooms by rows of metal cots that ping softly when someone turns in their sleep. Mainstream history reminds us that tens of thousands of brides, British, European, Australian, crossed oceans after the fighting to join spouses posted abroad, often on liners like the Queen Mary and the Aquitania, refitted for speed and capacity. The quirky bit? Some departures were preceded by bride schools, crash courses where you sat in drafty halls learning how to decipher your future in-laws' customs, cook foreign recipes with ration logic, and pronounce Wyoming without sounding like you're sneezing. Historians still argue whether those classes genuinely smoothed the landing or simply gave everyone a few good recipes and a false sense of preparedness. Your berth smells faintly of disinfectant, salt, and other people's nerves. A steward hands you a life jacket and demonstrates how to strap it on. Joke 1 arrives when you promptly put it on backward, and he says very politely that drowning in style is not the goal. You laugh, fix it, and promise to follow arrows more carefully from now on. The lifeboat drill is all elbows and counting. Women and children first. Sounds orderly in theory and chaotic in rehearsal. You stand under a sky already bruising toward evening, hearing the creak of rope and the barked numbers, and think that the ocean looks big enough to fit every worry you've packed. Once underway, the rhythm settles. The ship moves like a giant breathing, Inhale, exhale, up, down. Seasickness is democracy at work. It spares no social class and respects no hairstyle. The woman in the bunk above you, Kath from Leeds, learns to ride the swells with her eyes closed, murmuring the Lord's Prayer between hiccups. You share your ginger biscuits, the truly heroic kind from your cupboard at home, and she declares you a saint with crumbs on your halo. On calmer days, you stand at the rail with a paper cup of tea that tastes like the ship found the tea leaves on the second try. Salt spray freckle kisses your cheeks, your scarf, the faded floral the war once let in, flutters like a small flag of defiance. At night the portholes are shaded, the ship a stealthy shadow zigzagging across maps you're not allowed to see. An older woman with a voice made of wool insists the crew still zigzags, for luck, even though the shooting part is supposed to be over. A younger one swears she heard a sailor say, "It's to make the voyage more interesting for the fish." You file both theories under possibly true, definitely vivid. You tuck your neighbour's chicken feather, local celebrity, tireless contributor to morale, into your hatband and decide good luck charms can't hurt. Meals are a chorus of rattling cutlery and clattering tin trays. You learn the politics of the line, who sneaks second helpings, who trades their pudding for your bread, who has a jar of jam smuggled into her valise like a crown jewel. Someone passes around a booklet titled "Welcome to America," or Canada, or Australia, take your pick, and you practice saying sidewalk instead of pavement, cookies instead of biscuits, and gas instead of petrol. The booklet suggests smiling often and avoiding controversial topics. You decide to smile with moderation and save controversy for when it's useful, like when someone disrespects proper tea. Letters are read and reread till the paper goes soft at the fold lines. You've brought the one where your partner described the mess tense paper star cut from a ration label. You keep it tucked between your mattress and the frame, close enough to find in the dark. The women around you carry their own paper talismans, photographs with edges thumbed silver, marriage certificates folded into wallets, landing cards with names carefully printed so no official eyebrow will go north at the gangway. One evening, Kath produces a tiny bundle of lavender and says, "For the smell of home." You breathe it in and realize that home is currently a bouquet of ship diesel, sea air, and stubborn plants. Stories ripple through the decks. A French bride tells of meeting her husband when he fixed a broken bicycle chain outside her aunt's bakery. An Italian bride confesses she married a man who mispronounces her name endearingly and refuses to stop. There's a lot of laughing. There's also quiet crying, the middle-of-the-night kind you recognize and pretend not to hear unless the person wants to be found. You pass tissues, share blankets, create a nest of mutual assurance. Historians still argue whether the voyage communities forged here, temporary cities of bunks and whispered dreams, lasted on land or dissolved at the dock. You suspect the answer is both. Some friendships are for seasons, others for addresses. On the third morning, a Red Cross volunteer appears with a crate and a grin. Inside, knitting wool, boiled sweets and magazines with pages that smell gloriously of ink. She offers a talk on what to expect at immigration, questions about health, character, criminal records, you and the neighbour's chicken keep straight faces, and proof of marriage. She emphasises that customs officers are not personal enemies, merely professionals with very stern eyebrows. Joke 2, a chorus line of brides, practices answering, "Do you intend to become a burden on the state?" with a confident no, and someone adds, "unless the state needs more opinions on potatoes." The volunteer does not laugh, the brides do. Your thoughts go feral when the sea turns rough. Bunks creak like an orchestra of old doors, the hallway tilts, and you move like a dignified crab to keep your balance. A kettle goes clanging in the galley. You imagine it filing a complaint about working conditions. You and Kath coined the term accordion walk for the way everyone compresses and stretches with the ship, cabin to corridor, corridor to deck, a whole floating village swaying to a metronome only Neptune hears. You chew another ginger biscuit and decree it a medical device. In spare moments, you write to your partner, describing the ocean as a sheet of hammered metal one day and a silk ribbon the next. You tell them about Kath's lavender, the stern eyebrow tutorial, and the way the horizon line keeps its own counsel. You confess that you're scared in odd ways, of saying the wrong slang at the wrong time, of cooking a Thanksgiving turkey that turns out to be a cautionary tale of missing the bus because you asked for the queue and they thought you meant something else entirely. Then you backspace with your pen. Scared isn't the right word, awake is. On the 5th day, someone produces a harmonica, and the deck becomes a dance floor for 10 minutes of wobbly joy. You remember the canteen back home, the blue-lit aquarium of faces, and you let yourself sway, laughing when the ship insists you dip at entirely unromantic moments. A steward claps in time, even the weather seems to grin. For once, the Atlantic chooses not to audition for the role of antagonist. The nights are a mixture of soft and steel. You whisper to your bunkmates about first meetings, borrowed gowns, ration book feasts with cakes that were more ambition than substance. You tell them about the platform steam and the letter with blacked-out teeth. They tell you about visas acquired after 3 misdirected office visits, about mother-in-laws who have already claimed the guest room, about the way love looks when it's wearing a uniform and a deadline. You trade charms, a safety pin, a ribbon, a line from a hymn. On the 7th morning, a rumour runs ahead of the sun. Land soon. Land is a rumour you choose to believe. Breakfast is unremarkable, which feels remarkable. Women line the rails in coats and scarves, eyes narrowed against the wind, scanning a horizon that at first offers only new shades of grey. And then, there, something holds steady when the waves shift. A smudge that becomes a line that becomes a certainty. The ship tilts its shoulder like a dog sighting home. People cheer softly as if afraid to spook it. As the harbour headlands resolve into buildings, cranes, a busy geometry of piers, the ship's tannoy bursts to life with instructions, landing cards out, documents ready. No, you cannot bring that jar of jam if it counts as a liquid with ambitions. You smooth your certificate, check your photograph, touch the feather in your hatband like a button that says go. Joke 3 arrives when you promise your bunkmates you'll rate your customs officer's eyebrow on a scale from gentle wave to full storm surge. Dockside smells like engines, rope and warm bread you might be imagining. The gangway shudders into place and you join the slow river of women and children moving toward officials with ink pads and questions. A volunteer ties a tag to your coat with your final destination in tidy letters, like you're a parcel addressed to a future you've only seen in photographs. You remember the shoebox ships you sent across the world, socks, chocolate geology, feathered comedy, and think how strange and right it is to become a parcel yourself, love's cargo with legs. When your turn comes, the officer looks at your papers, then at you. His eyebrow is a modest tide. You relax. He stamps, thumps, gestures you onward. You step into a hall where names are called and reunions detonate like quiet fireworks, hands, faces, tears that look like relief, finally remembering how to move. Someone calls your name. You turn. Your partner stands there, older in the ways people get when they've been carrying heavy things, familiar in the ways that matter. The scarf around your neck finds the wind. The feather trembles. The ship's horn sounds a last, long note that feels like punctuation. You walk forward. Their face breaks open into a smile with all the old architecture intact. The ocean slips neatly behind you like a page turned, and the dock rises to meet your feet. You don't say anything at first. You don't need to. A hand meets a hand, a suitcase bumps a shin, and the whole noisy planet quiets around a small, stubborn truth. You made it. Not by luck alone, not by maps alone, but by all the tiny, ridiculous rituals you practiced. Letters with coded weather, socks with notes in the toe, cakes held together with optimism, and that steadfast ability to walk in the dark without a lamp. Welcome to the far shore. The next chapter is landbound and baffling and dear. You take a breath that tastes like diesel and possibility, and you step into it together. The bread is the first shock. You bite into it, expecting home, and get something faintly sweet, almost cake-like, that crumbles in a way your teeth aren't ready for. Your partner laughs at your expression and says, "You'll get used to it," which is exactly the kind of promise you're not sure you want kept. Arriving in a new country means learning an entire catalogue of small disorientations. Mainstream history talks about the adjustment period for war brides. How many found themselves in towns they'd never seen on a map, surrounded by customs they didn't yet speak fluently? The quirky part? Some local newspapers ran welcome bride columns introducing newcomers by name, age, and hobbies, as if the whole town were in on the arrival. Historians still argue whether that public exposure helped women integrate or simply made them feel like curiosities in a shop window. Your partner's hometown is smaller than you imagined. The streets are broad, the houses set back with neat lawns that look like they've been brushed into place. There's no blackout, no tape crisscrossing the windows, and the first night you leave a light on without fear, you have to fight the urge to cover it. Meeting your in-laws again is easier now that your partner is beside you. Their mother presses a pie into your hands before you've even taken off your coat. It smells unfamiliar, more spiced than you're used to, and the crust is impossibly flaky. The first joke comes when you confess you've never seen a pumpkin outside of a picture book. The second arrives when your father-in-law warns you that the local squirrels are organized and should be treated with respect. The third is from you, whispered to your partner. If the bread doesn't get me, the squirrels will. Days are filled with introductions, to neighbors who bring casseroles, to church congregations that clap politely when your name is announced, to shopkeepers who comment on your accent as if it's a remarkable piece of jewelry. You nod, smile, repeat your name until it feels slightly worn at the edges. In quieter hours, you walk the streets alone, noting the different rhythm of this place. Children play without glancing up at the sky, laundry flaps without fear of drawing attention, and the air smells more of cut grass than coal. You miss things you never thought you'd miss. The clang of the tram, the smell of rain on cobblestones, the familiar weight of ration books in your bag. Your partner notices. One evening, they hand you a small package. Inside is a tin of proper tea, imported at some cost, and a packet of biscuits that taste almost right. It's not home, but it's a bridge. You brew a pot, and the smell fills the kitchen, nudging the walls into something friendlier. Historians still argue whether war brides adapted more quickly because they'd already survived so much change, or whether the accumulated strain made the transition harder. You decide it's both. You can bend without breaking, but some days the bend feels like the whole of you is leaning toward the past. For now you learn the new bread, the new pies, the new map in your head. You keep a tin of proper tea on the shelf and a squirrel watch from the kitchen window, and each morning you remind yourself that this is just another kind of front line, one where the battles are smaller, the victories quieter, but the work of belonging is still done one day at a time. The baby wakes before the all clear. It's a shrill, unfiltered sound, half protest, half panic, and you scoop them up before they can build momentum. The blackout curtains are already drawn, but you still move toward the taped-up windows, rocking side to side, murmuring nonsense about how the siren is only singing backup tonight. Outside, the street is silent, except for the distant thump of someone shutting a shelter door. Mainstream history says wartime parents became experts at merging two entirely different routines, infant care and air raid precautions. The quirky bit? Some families swore by special blackout cribs with fitted covers to hide any glow from a candle or torch, so you could check on a baby without risking a warden's knock. Historians still argue whether these were lifesavers or just clever marketing for something most parents managed with blankets and ingenuity. Your partner is at work, so it's just you, the baby, and the thin soundtrack of a city holding its breath. The first joke comes when you realize you're pacing exactly the same path you did in the kitchen before the war. Only now, instead of balancing teacups, you're balancing this small, determined bundle of warmth. The second is when you glance at the clock and think, if the siren had any sense, it would coordinate with nap time. The third comes when the baby's hiccups start, perfectly in time with the slow tick of the mantelpiece clock. You've learned to keep a raid bag by the door, nappies, a flask of hot water, a spare bottle, one toy with a squeak that will keep you sane or break you depending on how long the night runs. When the siren finally wails, you're already halfway down the stairs, baby tucked against you like a secret. The shelter smells of damp wool and the faint metallic tang of the corrugated walls. Other mothers are here too, trading nods and quick, tired smiles, each rocking her own small heartbeat. The all clear comes slower than you'd like, but when you climb back into the flat, the blackout curtains flutter faintly from the draft, as if they're letting out a sigh. You settle the baby back into the cot, tape the loose edge of a curtain, and sit down with a mug of tea that's mostly warm water but feels like a medal. Historians still argue whether babies born in wartime grew up faster, sensing the unease in the air, or whether they were shielded by the very routines that exhausted their parents. You hope it's the latter, hope it's the, for now, your little one sleeps without knowing that the night was anything but ordinary, and you're willing to keep it that way as long as you can. You learn quickly that marriage under rationing is less about romance and more about strategy. Every meal is a puzzle, every recipe a gamble. The pantry is a small theatre where substitutions play starring roles. Dried milk, pretending to be cream, turnips auditioning as potatoes, and lentils trying to convince everyone they were meant to be in the stew all along. Mainstream history paints rationing as a national exercise in fairness, equal portions for all, regardless of class or income. But here's the quirky bit. Some couples treated it like a competitive sport, trading tips on how to stretch an ounce of butter or turn one egg into a cake that could feed 8. Historians still argue whether these kitchen innovations permanently changed national tastes or were gratefully abandoned as soon as peacetime returned. Your partner comes home with a triumphant smile one evening, holding a small brown paper packet like it's a love letter. Inside, actual coffee beans, acquired through a trade involving 2 tins of corned beef, a skein of knitting wool, and a promise you don't ask too many questions about. Joke 1 comes when you sniff the beans like a sommelier and announce that they smell of victory, with a hint of smugness. Cooking together becomes your version of a date. You read recipes aloud from the Ministry of Food leaflets, swapping incredulous glances at suggestions like mock goose or potato pastry. Joke 2 happens when your partner shapes mashed parsnips into a perfect little bird on the plate, only to eat it in one bite. Joke 3 arrives after you burn a batch of national loaf bread so badly that even the neighbour's chicken refuses it. Shopping trips are tactical missions. You queue early, armed with ration books and a mental list of acceptable substitutions. There's camaraderie in the lines, shared groans when sugar runs out, whispered tips about which shop still has onions. Sometimes you come home with exactly what you planned. Sometimes you return with something so odd, pickled beetroot again, that it demands a creative menu for the week. Evenings are for mending clothes by the fire, turning worn collars inside out, darning socks until they resemble patchwork maps. You both laugh at the idea of make, do and mend being romantic, yet there's something intimate about working side by side, saving scraps of cloth because you might need them for tomorrow's repairs. Historians still argue whether rationing strengthened marriages by forcing cooperation or strained them with constant compromise. You suspect it did both, but when you sit down to a dinner cobbled together from ingenuity and a bit of luck, a stew thickened with barley, a sliver of actual meat, bread just soft enough, you raise your mugs to each other. The toast isn't to the meal, but to the quiet pride of having made it together, one ration book page at a time. Some days the distance feels like a physical thing, a taut wire stretched between you and your partner, humming with strain. You write letters into the space, stack them on the table like bricks, but the gap never seems to shrink. Absence isn't just quiet, it's loud in ways you can't predict. It shouts from the empty chair at supper, from the coat peg that stays bare, from the way the bed feels tilted without another body to balance it. Mainstream history says wartime separations tested marriages more than most people expected. Letters were lifelines, but they could also be points of friction, tone misread, silences overinterpreted. The quirky bit? Some couples invented rituals to keep the connection alive. Both would read the same book miles apart or agree to watch for the same constellation in the night sky. Historians still argue whether these small shared acts made the distance easier or simply reminded people of what they were missing. You try one of those rituals. You and your partner agree to write about one thing you can see from your window each week. For you, it's the lamppost at the corner, crooked, with a metal patch near the base. For them, it's a line of poplar trees leaning toward a road they can't name for security's sake. The first joke comes when they say the trees are better conversationalists than half the men in the unit. The second is your reply, claiming the lamppost has political ambitions and will be running for office next spring. The third comes weeks later when they ask whether the lamppost has found a campaign manager yet. But the rituals don't quiet the ache. Some days, letters take weeks. Some weeks, there's nothing at all. You stop yourself from imagining the worst, then catch yourself doing it anyway. You cook meals that serve one without looking like they serve one. You go to bed earlier, as if that will make the next day's post come sooner. One evening, after another empty post day, you take your knitting into the shelter of the blackout curtains and leave the lamp on just a little brighter than allowed. You imagine your partner in the light of their own lamp, somewhere far away, pen moving across paper toward you. You pretend the two pools of light are touching. Historians still argue whether marriages that survived these long silences were stronger because of them, or whether they simply became skilled at living alongside the missing pieces. You think maybe it's neither. Maybe it's about carrying the wire without expecting it to stop humming, learning to tune your life to its sound until one day, without warning, it goes slack because the person on the other end has come home. The telegram is thin, one folded sheet, the kind that feels lighter than it should for the weight it carries. You stare at it for a long moment before opening it, because you've learned that once you read the words, you can't unread them. Mainstream history says telegrams in wartime were messengers of extremes, births, deaths, sudden orders, sudden returns. The quirky bit? Many people could tell whether it was good or bad news just by the time of day it arrived. Historians still argue whether that was real pattern or just the human instinct to find meaning in timing. The clerk who handed it over didn't meet your eyes, which isn't reassuring. You unfold it. The type is jagged, like it's been pressed into the page with urgency. Arriving home, stop tomorrow, stop, that's all. No greeting, no sign-off, just the bare fact. The first joke is immediate. You say aloud to no one. Couldn't spring for a few more words? The second comes when you realize you'll have to make the flat look like you haven't been living in organized chaos. The third is when you imagine them walking in to find you mid-scrub, holding a mop like a ceremonial staff. You spend the day preparing, not just tidying, but reacquainting the space with the idea of two people. You set out the chipped mug they always used, open the window to let in the damp spring air, push the bed to its proper place instead of the angle you'd grown used to. That night, sleep refuses to come. You keep thinking about how quickly a telegram can change the shape of your hours. Yesterday you were settling in for another stretch of absence. Tomorrow you'll be waiting at the platform, scanning faces through the steam. Historians still argue whether such sudden returns made reunions sweeter or more difficult, whether having no time to prepare was a blessing or a shock. You'll decide tomorrow. For now, you fold the telegram back into its envelope, set it on the table like a promise, and let the kettle boil twice before you remember you've already made tea. You arrive expecting a platform and instead get a ward. The telegram said, "Arriving home." Stop tomorrow. Stop and your heart wrote the rest. Steam, a crowd, the movie moment where the camera knows to find your face. What you get is a nurse with a clipboard and kind eyes pointing you down a corridor that smells of carbolic and boiled sheets. "He came in on the hospital train," she says. Efficient softness. "This way." The floor is so clean it squeaks under your shoes, and every squeak feels impertinent in a room full of quiet bravery. His bed is by a window, taped in a lattice you recognize too well. Except here, the light comes filtered through white paint and the constant swing of the curtain when someone passes. He looks both exactly like himself and nothing like himself. The face is right, your map, home, but thinner, the stubble a shade too dark against skin that has spent time away from sun. A bandage wraps his shoulder like a sash no one would ever covet. "Hey," he says, and it's the same voice that teased you about turnip pudding, the one that promised to fix the squeaky cupboard and made it worse. Your knees nearly give out with the relief of hearing it. Mainstream history says the machinery of wartime medicine became a wonder of organization. Field dressings applied under fire, stretcher bearers like metronomes through chaos, hospital trains painted with broad green bands and red crosses, each carriage its own small travelling ward. Evacuation chains shrank the miles between wound and care. Penicillin and sulfur drugs turned fevers that once wrote bad endings into recoveries with time and soup and a firm nurse. Historians still argue whether antibiotics or faster evacuations did more to bend the survival curve, but you decide your vote is simple. Yes, both. You take his unbandaged hand. It's warm, and that is a treaty signed in full. His fingers squeeze with a measured strength. Nurses' orders have that way of making even affection feel like a prescribed dose. "Hurts?" you ask. "Only when I breathe," he answers. You smile because you know that's a joke and not a report. First joke. You tell him the ward's sheets are tucked so tightly you're afraid to sit, in case the bed springs you like a mousetrap. He grins. "They're trying to keep me from escaping before my paperwork," he whispers. Visitors' hours compress the day into a sharp, precious wedge. You bring what you can carry from the rationed world. A small orange, smuggled from a cousin's miracle supply, a book with sentences you can read aloud without crying, a pair of the socks you knitted with the lopsided heel. The nurse approves all but the orange, which she confiscates for later, with a smile that suggests she will execute later on your behalf if necessary. Quirky tidbit, someone swears the hospital keeps a ledger of contraband oranges and redistributes them by severity of sulks. You make a mental note to develop a very convincing sulk. He tells you about the hospital train, beds bolted to the walls, a blur of hedgerows through the slit of curtain, tea brought in enamel mugs that clinked like bells with the train's sway. "We had a guard dog," he says, and when you raise an eyebrow, he amends. "All right, fine, it was a nurse with a stare that could fell a regiment." He taps the railing. "She saved men with that stare, made us all eat, wash, rest." Historians still argue whether morale was mostly medicine or mostly kindness administered with authority. You suspect the answer is that stare and the mug of tea in equal parts. He tires quickly. Mending takes more energy than breaking. Between stories, you narrate the domestic front in your best radio voice. The neighbour's chicken, local celebrity, has learned to peck the blackout curtains for crumbs and now believes itself to be a warden. The lamppost at the corner remains politically ambitious. Your mail still arrives in bundles like it suspects drama. Second joke, you confide that your national loaf has achieved a texture best described as building material, and he tells you even the hospital soup envies such structural integrity. A young orderly passes with a trolley, bandages folded with the precision of origami, bottles labelled in handwriting that would make your old schoolmistress weep. You learn new vocabulary by osmosis, dressings, drains, physio. You memorize the ward clock's small cough before each hour. In the next bed, a man dreams aloud in a language you don't recognize. The nurse smooths his hair and says, "All right, mate, all right," in the tone people use to speak to horses and infants and the frightened parts of adults. After a week of these visits, you could draw the place from memory, the hairline crack in the far tile, the way the afternoon light slides along the wall, the scuff where a bed leg always stops short. You bring a tiny framed photo from home and set it on the nightstand, your borrowed gown, his uniform, Two faces pretending to understand the future. The nurse pretends not to see. "Helps," she murmurs, which is permission and benediction in one syllable. On Tuesdays, the physiotherapist arrives with a canvas strap and the unassailable cheer of someone who knows pain's worst enemy is purpose. "We'll convince the shoulder," she says to him, as if the joint is a stubborn uncle who needs a better argument. He rolls his eyes and complies. The exercises are small and immense. You count with him your numbers, little ropes he can pull on when the ache rises. Historians still argue whether families in wards accelerated recovery by being there or complicated it with worry. You decide your job is translation, turn grimaces into jokes, turn hours into footsteps walked together, turn that canvas strap into a path back toward ordinary. Visitors' gossip runs like a brook between beds. A woman 3 cot lengths down swears her husband's surgeon ties better knots than the other surgeons. Someone else claims the tea is strongest on Thursdays because that's when the volunteer with opinions works the urn. You add your own river stones, the warden on your street who winks at your curtains, the recipe that almost turned carrots into marmalade. Third joke, you announce that if hospital corners get any sharper, the sheets will start slicing bread. 2 nurses laugh, which counts as a medical victory. You also learn the limits. There are days you should not come and you do not. Days when fever makes conversation cruel, and the kindest thing is to let sleep do its knitting. You leave a note with the nurse, counting for you even when I'm not here. You go home and sit at the table that has seen letters, parcels, telegrams, and you practice the discipline of not inventing catastrophes. The kettle whistles. You let it. The room is very quiet and stubbornly intact. He begins to read again, first a paragraph, then a page. You bring the book you've been sharing across distance, and you take turns, trading chapters like slices of rationed cake. In the margins, you underline 2 lines you both love, and when he's too tired to hold the book, you keep going, voice low, the words laying themselves along the sheets like extra blankets. There are awkward moments. The first time he sits up alone, you clap, and he chides you for treating him like an acrobat. The first time he tries to make a joke about the wound and fails, you both sit in that small weather of not quite laughing until it passes. The first time you touch the skin near the bandage, just a thumb's breadth, a careful mapmaker's brush, you look up to make sure your eyes are telling the same story as your hand. I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of this. Gifts arrive that make the nurses smirk and say, "We'll see." A tin of condensed milk with a bow. 3 lemons, round as moons, carried reverently by an aunt who could have traded them for a new pair of stockings. A newspaper with the crossword already filled because your father-in-law didn't want him straining. You bring a small comb and tidy the hair above his ear. The old intimacy of grooming, proof that even in a room where everything has a label, you still know the unlabeled map of him. The ward has a sound you will always remember. The slow metronome of breath, the occasional clink of a spoon, the soft thunder of a trolley, the 1 joke per hour that travels bed to bed like a migrating bird. A chaplain with socks that don't match tells a story about a general who tripped over a cat and promoted it by accident. You're fairly certain he invents a new cat anecdote for every room. But no one minds. Cats should be everywhere, particularly where pain is. On your last visit before discharge, you bring the scarf, the faded floral sky that survived a shop with too much sky, and tie it to the bed rail. Souvenir, you say, proof the outside world still provides questionable fashion. He laughs. The nurse pretends not to notice the contraband beauty. Bring it back when you go, she murmurs, or the linen will get ideas. He is coming home. The doctor says it like a weather report that finally decided on sun. There will be limitations and exercises and a list of forbidden heroics. You nod at all of them. Later, at home, you walk from chair to bed to kitchen and back, rehearsing the ballet of helping without hovering, of assisting without stealing the work his body needs to do. You move the teapot to the lower shelf, the mugs to the nearer hook, the pride to the pocket where you keep things you'll take out, only when necessary. On the day of discharge, you sign papers with your best competent spouse signature. You help him into his good coat, which has been mended at the elbow with a patch you matched almost perfectly if no one brings a magnifying glass. He stands slow, tests the world, nods once like a craftsman satisfied with the join. Outside, the air smells of buses and hope. The hospital's brick wall looks warmer than the first day you saw it. As you walk away, the nurse with the powerful stare catches your eye and gives the smallest, most triumphant nod. You return it, membership in a club you never applied to join, and will honor the rest of your life. Historians still argue whether hospitals are places of ending or beginning. You decide they are both, stitched together by hands that fold corners sharp enough to keep the sheets, and sometimes the people, held where they can mend. At home, you set him in the armchair that has been saving its strength for him. You put the kettle on, you retrieve the scarf from your bag and toss it over the back like a flag of peace reclaimed. He looks at you in that way he does when words would only bruise the air, and says nothing. You say nothing back. The silence is no longer the absence of letters. It's simply the sound of two people remembering how to breathe in the same room. The first night back, the bed feels both too small and too big. You've grown used to stretching diagonally, and now there's a warm, solid presence beside you, breathing slow, but not quite evenly. Sleep doesn't come quickly for either of you. For him, the war lingers in dreams that start quiet and then twist, shoulders tensing, breath catching, a murmur that doesn't sound like words you've ever heard. For you, the habit of listening for the postman or the siren hasn't faded, and your mind still ticks through the night in shifts. Mainstream history calls it readjustment, as though it's just a matter of setting the clock forward or back. But the quirky bit is how many couples found that reunion was harder than separation. Two lives run in parallel for years, suddenly forced to merge again. Historians still argue whether that strain was a temporary growing pain or a permanent scar. You suspect it's more like a limp you learn to walk with. You lie still while he shifts, trying not to startle him awake. The first joke comes when, at some small hour, he says, "This pillow is definitely smaller than regulation issue," and you tell him he can file a complaint with the quartermaster in the morning. The second comes when you roll toward him, and he mutters, "Don't step in the mud," and you promise to keep the sheets spotless. The third is from you whispering, "If you start doing roll call at dawn, I'm moving to the sofa." Daylight helps. The kitchen smells of tea and toast, and you sit across from each other with the morning paper spread between you like a truce flag. You talk about ordinary things, laundry, what's left in the larder, whether the neighbour's chicken has stopped pecking at the blackout curtains, but every so often a shadow crosses his expression when something, an engine backfiring, the slam of a bin lid, yanks him elsewhere. You see it, and you let the silence be long enough for him to find his way back. Evenings are quieter than you imagined. There's less urgency than in your letters, more pauses. You both notice the small domestic differences that have crept in, how you stack plates now, how he folds socks differently. It's not conflict, but it's adjustment. And it feels strange that learning each other again can be just as tiring as missing each other was. Historians still argue whether these moments of relearning made post-war marriages stronger, or if they simply taught couples to live with a new, permanent seam in their life together. You think maybe it's neither. It's not about erasing the seam, it's about sewing around it, choosing patterns that make the join part of the design. That night, you settle into bed and find your feet touching his before your mind can object. His hand rests lightly on your arm, a careful weight, as if asking permission. You answer by shifting closer. It isn't the same as before, it's different, and in its own way just as precious. Finding a home after the war turns out to be less about choice and more about persistence. The city is crowded with couples like you, some newly married, some newly reunited, all looking for a roof that isn't borrowed from relatives or shared with half a dozen strangers. The newspapers are full of tiny ads: 2 rooms, no bath, attic flat, cold water only, basement damp but cheerful, You circle them in pencil like you're planning a heist. Mainstream history notes the post-war housing shortage as one of the most stubborn obstacles to normal life. The quirky bit? In some cities, people queued overnight outside estate agents just to be first in line for a rental viewing. Historians still argue whether the shortage was a failure of planning or simply an unavoidable consequence of demobilization and years of neglected building. You and your partner visit every possibility, no matter how unpromising. There's the basement flat where the wallpaper peels like sunburned skin. The attic with a view of nothing but chimneys, each one coughing soot like an overworked smoker. The terrace house with a landlord who spends more time warning you about noise than showing you the rooms. The first joke comes when you're shown a spacious kitchen that's smaller than your wardrobe. The second is when you stand in a garden so tiny you could mow it with scissors. The third is when your partner asks if damp but cheerful means the walls will tell you jokes while they drip. Weeks stretch into months, and your patience frays like the cuffs on your best coat. You consider settling for a place that smells permanently of fish until a friend of a friend mentions a small upstairs flat above a bookshop. The rent is high, but the rooms are dry, and the windows look out over a street that's busy without being loud. When you move in, there's nothing but the basics: a bed, a table, 2 mismatched chairs, and a stove that needs coaxing. You set the table with the chipped mugs and your partner's old mess tin, and you feel for the first time since the war began like you're standing in a space that's yours. Historians still argue whether post-war couples valued home more because of the struggle to get one. You don't need the debate. You know the answer. Every time you turn the key in the door, it feels like winning something that matters. You wake to the sound of the bookshop's bell below, 2 bright notes that mean the door has opened on a day you're determined to keep ordinary. The upstairs flat echoes in a friendly way, wood floors answering your footsteps like a polite chorus. Relearning life together turns out to be less about grand decisions and more about 1,000 micro-negotiations. How hot the water should be for tea, whether socks are folded or rolled, which window gets opened first to chase the night air out. You and your partner set rules with the seriousness of diplomats. Dishes alternate daily. Whoever finishes the last piece of bread writes bread on a scrap pinned to the corkboard you've declared the cabinet office. The broom receives a field promotion to Commander of Crumbs, which becomes the first joke of the morning. The second comes when your partner salutes the kettle for distinguished service under steam. The third is a quiet one you make to yourself after the bookshop bell rings for the 5th time. If I ever go missing, start the search between history and cookery. The bed is centered now, not at an angle, 2 pillows that no longer feel like a test of allegiance. Still, sleep takes practice. He comes awake sometimes like a diver surfacing too fast, and you've both agreed on a system. A word, a hand on the shoulder, a shared breath counted to 5. You keep a glass of water on the nightstand and the faded floral scarf draped over the chair as a soft anchor for the eye. The shell casing with your initials, a curio with edges knocked smooth by many thumb circles, stands on the shelf like a veteran promoted to paperweight. Breakfast isn't glamorous, but it's yours. National loaf, sliced as straight as courage allows, jam that pretends to be abundant, tea brewed to the exact degree that makes both of you sigh in unison. Mainstream history says post-war rationing in some countries outlived the war by years. Meat and sugar lingering on coupons while headlines shouted, "Peace." You're living proof of the footnote. Victory tastes faintly of turnip. You make peace with it. Sometimes you even make pudding with it. Furnishing the place is a scavenger hunt. You haunt auctions, church basements, and the miraculous shop 2 streets over that sells nearly chairs. When you finally find a simple wardrobe stamped with a neat little CC41 mark, the utility furniture seal that declares it sturdy, sensible, and unseduced by frippery, you run your palm along its door like it's a good dog. Quirky tidbit. Utility pieces are supposed to be identical, but your wardrobe has a tiny carved nick in the corner, a shy flourish by a workman who couldn't resist. Historians still argue whether that whole scheme democratized taste or just standardized it until rooms wore the same face. You decide you prefer a sensible face with a secret wink. You each relearn your corners of the day. He does his shoulder exercises by the window that sniffs the wind from the river, counting reps to the rhythm of footsteps below. You time your mending to the quiet hour after lunch, when the bookshop's customers thin out and the bell only rings once in a while. He tries returning to habits that used to fit, walking quickly, scanning doorways, but the city no longer needs scouting, and he has to retrain his eyes to love the unremarkable. You try not to fill every silence with useful noise. Sometimes you simply share a chair arm and let the room explain itself. There are flare-ups, of course, sudden weather that blows in without warning. The slam of a lorry's tailgate turns his jaw into granite. A delayed letter, now rare, makes your chest tight in ways you thought you'd retired. You've learned to say, is this a kitchen problem or a walking problem? If kitchen, you knead dough together, turning flour into breath. If walking, you put on coats and give your feet a job. The lamppost at the corner, your old correspondent, still leans conspiratorially. You tip your head at it like one politician greeting another. Money behaves like a shy cat. It arrives with a demob grant here, a week's wages there, then slips away again for rent, coal, a new pair of soles for the shoes that carried you through too many seasons. In the evenings, you sit with a pencil and the good side of an envelope, writing columns, food, light, unexpected lemons. You're both thriftier and more extravagant than before. Thrifty with your coins, extravagant with your lets, and we could. You keep the shoebox habit, only now the parcels go the other way. A small bundle to his mate who's still mending 2 counties away, biscuits that could be used as building materials in a pinch, a silly clipping about the neighbour's chicken, local celebrity, now convinced the blackout was her idea, a pocket-sized book of jokes copied out in your own hand, a ribbon to your friend Kath from the ship tied around a letter that smells faintly of real tea. Your kitchen table continues to double as a tiny post office, stamping and sealing hope into brown paper. On Sundays, you visit the in-laws. The house still smells faintly of boiled cabbage and furniture polish, a scent you've begun to file under comforting. Your father-in-law and your partner sit with their elbows in synchrony and argue cheerfully about football results. Your mother-in-law pretends she's not watching you both like a weather vane, reading your faces for forecasts. She has begun to say your name softer, as if the edge of it has finally worn smooth in her mouth. The city changes its clothes in front of you. Posters fade, then disappear. Windows shed their tape like snakeskins. A new tram clatters down the high street as if auditioning for the role of normal. You step into a cinema one evening and flinch at the brightness of the screen. Your partner squeezes your hand, a quick signal, squeeze, squeeze, I'm here. You squeeze back. Me too. You'd think the simplicity would wear out. It becomes truer instead. Work re-enters the house like an old friend who's been standing on the step, unsure if they're welcome. He goes to the office some days, to the yard others, never quite sure which task will fit the shoulder and the rest of him. You pick up shifts at the bookshop when the owner needs to fetch new stock, and you stand behind the till, breathing ink and dust, filing titles in your head under One Day and One Day Soon. You recommend paperbacks with the authority of a general issuing rations for the soul. Evenings are for lessons, self-assigned. You teach him the recipes that are more arrangement than cooking. He teaches you the knots that fasten things until they cannot imagine being apart. The bicycle with the applauding bell has been coaxed back to life, the bell still sentimental. You both ride to the park where trees are busy with leaves like optimistic hands. Children nap in prams under the open sky. This still startles you, then immediately doesn't. The air no longer waits for sirens, it only waits for evening. Sometimes you find yourselves talking around a subject like cats around a puddle. The war sits on the shelf at home between the shell casing and the scarf, rarely named but seldom absent. When words do come, they're practical. The men he misses, The friend who laughs like a dropped toolbox. The night a chaplain with mismatched socks told cat stories that made pain step outside for a smoke. You do not pull on threads you aren't ready to follow to the end. Historians still argue whether silence after war spares or starves. You both discover there are silences that bruise and silences that bandage. You try to keep the second kind. Soft pleasures make a quiet parade. The first morning, you spread real butter so thin it looks like a rumour. The first night, the kettle sings while rain rattles the windows, and you do not check the sky for intentions. The first time you hang laundry and think, unreasonably proud, that your socks, those patchwork maps, now wave a little flag that says, "We live here." Your routines grow muscle. Mondays you mend. Tuesdays you sharpen pencils and hope. Wednesdays you visit the market and argue politely with the cheese man about what exactly constitutes cheese. Thursdays you read on the floor because chairs feel too serious. Fridays you take the long way home, past the bakery, where the smell lifts you by your ribs and deposits you at your front door, already convinced the evening will be kind. None of it is cinematic. All of it is astonishing. You're not the people who wrote telegrams in clipped lines anymore, and you're not the people who clung to each other on smoky platforms either. You are postscript and preface, both. The flat keeps your secrets and amplifies your laughter, the way rooms do when they've chosen you back. One night, you fall asleep with the window open and wake to the sound of the bookshop bell in a dream. A bright note crossing from downstairs into your quiet. You reach for his hand, find it, and think of all the bells you've learned to answer. Sirens, whistles, harmonicas on moving decks, ward clocks clearing their throats before each hour. This bell means none of those. This bell means morning, someone choosing a story, and you two choosing, again, the slow work of a life that learns itself while it is lived. You roll toward him, his breath evens, then hitches, then evens again. In the grey light, the scarf on the chair looks like a small square of sky. The shell casing glints, deliberate and calm. The wardrobe wears its sensible face and its secret flourish. Your heart does the quiet math it has gotten very good at. We are here. We are different. We are together. That is enough. That is more than enough. The seasons begin to settle into themselves again, as if the city has decided that constant upheaval is bad for the complexion. Spring turns into summer without the sense of surprise it used to carry during the war, when warm weather felt like a brief reprieve rather than a scheduled visitor. Your street smells faintly of sun-warmed brick and the faint tang of the bookshop's old paper stock drifting upward. Mainstream history says post-war summers were a paradox. People were hungry for leisure, yet work and rebuilding never slowed. The quirky tidbit? In some neighborhoods, locals organized make-do holiday camps in back gardens, complete with tin bath paddling pools and blackout curtains, repurposed as tent walls. Historians still argue whether these were joyful improvisations or just reminders of scarcity dressed up as play. You and your partner decide you'll do something resembling a holiday. Not a grand journey, there's neither the budget nor the appetite for railway queues, but a local kind of escape. A few miles out of town, there's a narrow river bend with grass that grows wild right down to the water. You pack a basket with the good loaf, a jar of pickled onions, 2 apples, and the last of the biscuits from a tin you'd forgotten in the wardrobe's back corner. The first joke comes when you lift the lid and discover they've gone so stale they could double as doorstops. The second comes when your partner insists they'll soften nicely in tea. The third is when you test that theory and discover the biscuits fight back. The walk is slow, deliberate, and you find yourself noticing the way the land has healed. Bomb craters now shallow dips where rainwater gathers, and wildflowers stake their claim. You pause at a wooden stile, hand on warm sunlit rail, and feel the quiet hum of insects in the grass. Your partner points out the shape of a kestrel overhead, its wings holding still, as if nailed to the air. You spread your blanket on the bank, careful to keep one corner weighted with the basket so it doesn't billow away in the breeze. The river is slow here, greenish-brown, and carrying the occasional leaf like a small ferry. You eat, talk, and then stop talking, without needing to replace the silence. Later, back at the flat, you leave the windows open to the evening air. He sits at the table mending a strap on the satchel that's followed him through too many campaigns. You boil water for tea, the kettles whistle a sound you've learned to lean toward, not away from. The shell casing glints on the shelf, the scarf still in its quiet post. The bookshop bell rings faintly below, and you imagine someone downstairs discovering a book they didn't know they needed. Historians still argue whether peace is an actual moment or just a gradual drift away from fear. You think it's both, the suddenness of one telegram and the slow, steady days that follow. It's in the way you and he have learned to read each other's smallest changes, in the way the flat now feels like a place where the furniture knows you by name. As night comes on, you pull the blanket from your river picnic over your knees, still faintly scented with grass. You watch the street lamps flicker on one by one, and the city hum beneath them, steady, unhurried, sure of itself in a way that still feels like a quiet miracle. Autumn arrives softly, like someone slipping into the room so as not to wake you. The mornings are cooler now, the windows gathering a lace of condensation before the sun burns it away. You notice the way the air smells. Apples from a grocer's display, damp leaves pressed into the pavement, trace of coal smoke curling upward from chimneys that haven't worked all summer. Mainstream history notes that in the years just after the war, the first cold snap could be an event in itself, families bringing blankets out from trunks, airing them on the line, and hoping the moths had shown mercy. Your quirky tidbit? Some people swore by stuffing crumpled newspaper into bed frames or lining the inside of coats for extra warmth. Historians still argue whether this was frugality at its most ingenious or simply necessity pretending to be tradition. Your flat holds the season differently now. You move the armchair closer to the window where you can watch the street without having to lean. He patches a tear in the elbow of his sweater, the navy wool worn soft from years of service and then from years of mending. You both take to brewing tea more often, the ritual as much about warmth in your hands as it is about the drink itself. One evening, you walk together through the market just before closing. Stalls are quieter, lanterns lit against the dimming sky. You buy a paper bag of roasted chestnuts, their heat soaking through to your palms. The first joke comes when one bursts unexpectedly, startling you into dropping it. The second comes when he pretends to salute the chestnut vendor for services rendered to morale. The third is in the way you both eat them too quickly, burning your fingers, and pretend you meant to. Back home, the smell of chestnuts lingers in the curtains. You sit side by side, sharing the blanket you once took to the river, and talk about winter plans. There's a mending list to get through, and a cupboard you've decided will finally hold more than just tins and the odd jar. You speak in small, practical sentences, wood for the fire, lamp oil, a new kettle, if the old one insists on sulking. It's not dramatic, and that's the point. The bookshop below has started stocking Christmas titles early, and you help tie sprigs of holly to the shelves. Children press noses to the window, breath fogging the glass. Your partner stands nearby, watching with an expression you've learned to read as gratitude disguised as curiosity. Sometimes you catch him looking around the flat in the same way, like he's checking the perimeter of a life he can finally stand still in. Historians still argue whether homecoming after a war is ever complete. You suspect it isn't, not in the way people imagine. It's not a door closing, it's a series of doors you keep finding, each leading to a room you didn't know you needed, and together you've stopped looking for the exit. That night, the rain starts while you're already in bed. It patters on the glass in a rhythm that could be mistaken for someone knocking. You reach for his hand, find it, and keep it, your breaths sinking with the slow percussion outside. The shell casing on the shelf catches a glimmer from the street lamp, the scarf on the chair sways in the draught. And the wardrobe, with its sensible face and secret flourish, stands guard in the corner like a silent witness to all that's been rebuilt. You let your eyes close, not with the wary half-sleep you used to know, but with the trust that morning will come without incident. Somewhere below, the bookshop bell might ring tomorrow. Somewhere beyond, the river will keep bending around the same banks. And here, in this quiet room, you've learned the truest part of surviving. Not just that you made it through, but that you made something worth staying for. And so, you let the season wrap around you like the wool scarf you've kept close all these years, soft now, familiar, no longer smelling of damp storage, but of the life you've lived in it. The city outside moves at its own pace, but up here the minutes seem to stretch, long and gentle, like shadows in the late afternoon. You notice the details you used to rush past. The way the lamplight bends through the glass, painting a slow arc on the wall. The hum of the kettle just before it sings, the warmth radiating into your palms as you pour. The steady creak of the chair beneath you, wood remembering every person who's sat there before. Breath deepens, shoulders loosen, even the sounds outside, once sharp enough to jolt you, have softened into a background score. Footsteps on the pavement below are unhurried, the laughter drifting up from the pub is low and warm, and somewhere a window closes against the chill with a muted click. You think about the days behind you, the ones you've rebuilt from rationed moments and mended plans. Each one, no matter how small, a step further from the noise and closer to the quiet. The blanket across your lap grows heavier as you sink further into the chair. The air feels cooler now, but not in a way that bites, more like a gentle reminder that rest is allowed, that stillness is earned. So you let your eyes close and let the story fade into the space between heartbeats. The world will still be here when you wake. The kettle will still sing. And this room, with all its modest comforts, will still be yours.